A few months ago, I, as a lifelong fantasy lover, tried Robin Hobb for the first time. I read the Farseer trilogy, and I had a lot of thoughts and feelings. Clearly. Go check out that reading vlog if you missed it. I'll have it linked in all the normal places. After completing the original trilogy, which, not to spoil it too much, but I did enjoy it quite a bit, you kindly informed me that I should definitely continue in the series, and also that I should definitely continue to make reading vlogs for each little trilogy within the longer series. And since I live to surf, I'm here. Giving the people what they want. I'm very excited to continue on in the series, and I'm going to put this down because my poor little hand is in pain trying to hold these very heavy books up all in one hand. Oh my god. Ow. Not that the next trilogy is any smaller. I actually think it's bigger. I'm not sure I even can hold this in one hand. Wow. I feel like my childhood piano teacher would be so proud of my spread, you know, get that octave. This is the Liveship Traders trilogy. It is the second trilogy within the longer realm of the Elderlings series by Robin Hobb. I have heard mixed things about this second trilogy. Many of you have told me that you think I'm going to love it even more than the first trilogy, but I've also seen a number of people say that this trilogy is their least favorite of the entire series, or that it feels sort of out of place with the rest of the series. So I'm very curious to know how I react to it and how I feel about it at the end of the day. I would say my number one critique of the Farseer trilogy, if I had to narrow it down, would be how Robin Hobb portrayed her female characters, especially the more minor female characters. There's a pattern, especially in the third book in the trilogy, that I just found very odd. But I have been reassured time and time again in the comments that Liveship Traders has some awesome, well-developed female characters, so I'm very excited to see that come to life. I will, by necessity, probably have to spoil things from the original trilogy, so if you have not read the Farseer trilogy and you have any interest in doing so, I would not recommend watching this video if you don't like spoilers of any kind. If you've read the Farseer trilogy but you haven't read Liveship Traders yet, you will be safe in the non-spoiler sections, but I can't. I have to be able to talk about what happened in the previous books to some extent. I need a little bit of leeway here, okay? But since I'm not reading the blurbs because y'all really put the fear of major spoilers in me, I'm just gonna start. The first book in the trilogy is Ship of Magic. The tagline on the front, which is all I will read, says, "As addictive as morphine," from the Times. That feels a little of its time, you know? A little insensitive, maybe? Maybe that's just me. I just want to know how long it is. 880 pages. Love it. So I'm going to read to page 440 before I come back to let you know my halfway thoughts. Like this video if you're excited. Read along with me if you so choose. Share your thoughts on this series and this trilogy in the comments, and let's just dive in to the Liveship Traders, starting with book 1 or book 4, depending on how you look at it, Ship of Magic by Robin Hobb. I am making amazing progress. I'm so excited to be back in this world, and kind of like how I read the first trilogy and loved it so much that I kept thinking about it and eventually had to come back for more. The sponsor of today's video, Sorry, made a toothbrush so amazing that not only did I keep coming back for more twice a day, every day, but my husband started coveting my toothbrush. Not only could I see it in his eyes, but he literally told me that he wanted his own. And so I went back for more and got him his own. While I work from the comfort of our hour home every single day and can kind of brush on my own schedule. My husband works outside of the house and frequently travels for work. He actually just got back from a full month on tour, and that means that he needs a toothbrush that can travel easily. And that is one of the best things about the Suri electric toothbrush. Traditional electric toothbrushes are a huge pain for travel. They're usually big and bulky and heavy. They typically don't hold a charge for very long, so you end up having to travel with a big, bulky, awkward charging situation. And Suri has solved those issues with their electric toothbrush. The toothbrush is high quality, but very lightweight. It's very easy to toss in your bag, much more similar to the size of a manual toothbrush, but cleans your teeth much more effectively. Comes with a little cover for the brush head if you'd like to travel that way, or you can pick up the UVC cleaning charging case to make it even easier to take your toothbrush on the go. Not only is the case itself magnetic, but the toothbrush and the inside of the case are magnetic as well. So it's not gonna open by mistake in your bag and make a mess. And also, if you happen to open it upside down because you're jet-lagged, your toothbrush isn't gonna fall out. You can also charge your Suri toothbrush from within the cleaning case if you so choose, but honestly, you don't even have to bring a charger for your Suri toothbrush. The Suri electric toothbrush holds a charge for over a month. Not only are Suri electric toothbrushes made with a sleek sonic design with an intentional minimalist aesthetic, but they also come in 6 gorgeous colors. I have Winter Fern and my husband chose Midnight Black, but honestly, every single color is beautiful. Manual brushes are disposable and terrible for the environment and give you a subpar clean. But I, in the past, have found electric toothbrushes to be a little bit too intense, a little too harsh on my gums and teeth. I've dealt with some sensitivity, but I found Suri to be the best of both worlds with its aluminum body and replaceable plant-based recyclable brush heads. Gives me a thorough clean that is still gentle. There's also a pressure sensor, so if you're brushing too hard, it vibrates to let you know, which is something that I very much need. I had a dentist appointment recently and I felt like I was getting a gold star. It was very validating. If you share a bathroom like we do, it is so nice to be able to use their mirror mount. Keeps your counter clutter and cable free. The first time my husband used his Suri toothbrush, he was so impressed. He kept commenting on how quiet it was compared to our old electric toothbrushes and that he felt like it got his teeth so clean. He also really loved Suri's Restore toothpaste. He said it tasted amazing, which I agree, so we can share the toothpaste. My husband is excited to be home from tour, but I must say he is now excited to go on his next tour because of his Suri toothbrush. Thank you again so much to Suri for partnering with me on this video. Click the link in my description box or scan the QR code on screen to shop and use my code PLANT15 for 15% off Suri. I know you'll see why we love them so much. I am halfway through Ship of Magic. Chewy's here, even though you can barely see him because he's lying down on the armrest of my chair. Look at those tabs. What a book. You know, Hobb and Hobb, I feel that we are, of a similar ilk. I too am not concise. You maybe know because you're watching this video, and if you've ever seen any of my other videos, they tend to be long. I usually have a lot to say. I am not good at being brief. And neither is Hobb and Hobb, because why is this book so long? Listen, I'm enjoying it. I feel like I have now gotten into the flow of it, but this was such a slow start. It is ridiculous. A significantly slower start than I remember even of the first book of the first trilogy. Oh my God. And I think part of that is that there are so many more characters. The first trilogy follows Fitz, and it is Fitz's story. There are obviously other characters, but he is our point of view character. In this book, we have several point of view characters and we're constantly switching between them. And I think that made it feel significantly slower because we would get a portion of a chapter with one character and then jump to another one for a portion of a chapter and jump to another one. And the chapters are very long, and still I felt like I was only getting a little taste of each character. And then as I was maybe starting to get into the swing of things, starting to feel like I was getting to know them better, getting used to whichever part of the story we were in, we would jump to another point of view. And that is kind of the thing about multiple points of view. There is always a risk that it will feel kind of jarring, that it will feel a little frustrating as a reader. And typically, well, I don't know about typically. I think it really depends on how it's executed for me, because I read a lot of fantasy. I read a lot of books with multiple points of view. It is fine a lot of the time. And yet, there are times where I do feel that it is frustrating, that it is constantly switching it up as soon as I get really into it. And in this case, that was my experience. I felt like I was not immersed in the book and really invested in the characters or feeling like I was fully locked in until probably 40% of the way through, maybe even 45% of the way through, which is literally hundreds of pages. That is wild. And I think if I was not reading this for a video, I would have put it down, not permanently DNF'd, but just kind of lost interest early on and moved on to other things and maybe forgotten to come back to it for a long time because wow. That was a lot. I am starting to get more invested now. I am a little bit more interested in where the plot is going. I am more interested in a couple of the characters. I do still find some of the characters deeply annoying. Before I say who I find deeply annoying, feel free to leave your guesses in the comments. The main one is Wintro. He is literally holier than thou all the time. And I get that he was training to be a monk, so it's kind of part of the deal. But he is also a child, and he is pissing me off. He's just annoying, okay? Maybe he will win me over. Maybe I will start to really care about him. I am not invested yet. He keeps doing things, and then afterwards he's like, what was the lesson? Well, I think I did everything right, and yet everyone hates me, and I will never be accepted in this crew, and my life will be a living hell because of the choices I made, but every choice I made was correct. And it's like, well then maybe, like, dude, I'm not saying you should go around doing things that go against your values 24/7, but maybe loosen up like the tiniest bit. My God. Relax. Anyway, yeah, so he is definitely the most irritating to me. Kyle, also annoying, but more than annoying, he's just a piece of shit. What is wrong with Kyle? Also, fuck you, Kyle. Also, why is his name Kyle? Because, listen, apparently Kyle, I researched it, okay? Because in the past I've complained about names in books, and then people have told me in the comments that I'm wrong about where a name comes from, which is fine. I am willing to admit when I'm wrong. I appreciate feedback. I appreciate corrections. Ideally, kind and respectful ones, but, it's fine. So I looked it up, and Kyle is a name that comes from Scotland and is pretty old, but also was very, as far as I can tell, very, very uncommon for a long time. And the first time that it became a popular name was in the 1990s, which makes sense to me because as I was reading, I thought, I cannot help but picture the 14 separate Kyles I went to elementary school with in the 90s and 2000s. And it's weird because this book came out at the end of the 90s, so Robin Hobb would have known that Kyle was a super popular name, at least in the US and Canada. I'm pretty sure Robin Hobb is American, is she not? Is she British? No, I think she's American. Regardless, she would probably know that Kyle was a super popular baby name in those periods. I don't know. It feels weird. All the other names are either fantasy names or genuinely much more old names and feel more like fantasy names. And then you just have Kyle being a misogynistic asshole, left, right, and center, abusing his children, treating his wife like shit. What a terrible man. And he's obviously meant to be terrible, but I am struggling with him. He's on the page so much, and all he does is get angry over nothing, be the most fragile and emotional little man baby, and spew misogynistic crap at everyone all around him all the time. And I'm sick of it. Okay, I'm sick of it. Get off my page. Leave me alone. What is wrong with you? Leave everyone alone, actually. No. So he's annoying me, but in a different way, of course. And then I would also say that several of the other characters are also annoying me in different ways. Althea was annoying me more earlier in the story. She felt very much uninterested in taking anything into her own hands, practicing any form of agency. I was getting frustrated with her. She is starting to try to do something for herself now. It did take hundreds of pages, but she's doing something now, so I appreciate that. Kenneth kind of disappeared for the last while. He does seem to have a god complex, so that'll be fun to see how that plays out. I don't know. I feel like we've spent the least amount of time with Kenneth, even though the way the book started made it seem like he was going to be very prominent. Maybe he comes back later. I imagine he does. Veronica, I mean, girl, I get it. She's going through it, but also she is making repeated, very stupid decisions that honestly don't really make sense for a woman of her age who was also shown to be very shrewd, who was in charge of a lot of the running of the estate, running of their household, managing money, making sure that their lands were being farmed and so on for a long period of time. I just feel like the decisions she's making don't make any sense. And it's weird to me that she's acting like she had no idea that Kyle was a misogynistic asshole until this very moment. And now, the leopards are eating her face and he's being a misogynistic asshole to her. And all of a sudden she hates him. Sorry, has he not been married to your eldest daughter for 13 years or something? Pretty sure that was established. Did you never talk to him even once before you decided to give control of your entire estate, your future success and security as a family, your liveship, your husband's legacy, your own legacy to this man? Okay, Kefria was irritating me at the beginning. I think the more I learn about her and her relationship and their dynamic, the more I understand where she's coming from, and it does feel like an arc is being set up for her. So I am withholding judgment on her, although she did irritate me early on by just nodding and agreeing with all of Kyle's misogynistic rampages. Even the other children are annoying. It's just, it's everyone. And maybe the point is that they all start very flawed, very frustrating, and then they grow over the course of the trilogy. That would make sense. I feel like that's also a complaint a lot of people had about Fitz in the original trilogy, is that they annoyed the crap out of people. And he did have a lot of growth over the trilogy. I didn't find him, at least as far as I remember, you can fact check me if you've watched the other reading vlog recently. It has been many months now since I read the first trilogy. I don't remember particularly disliking him in the first book. I didn't find him annoying. I didn't really have to get over being frustrated with him. In this case, though, oh my God, everyone is the worst. Some of them are just starting to figure it out and be a little less useless. So that's fun for me. From what I remember from the original trilogy, I don't remember the writing being particularly lyrical. It wasn't, very poetic. It wasn't full of lush descriptions, but it was very competent, very clear, had some great quotes and moments, and really what stood out most was the character work over time and the action and the immersion. I feel like I remember saying in my vlog, and I know I remember feeling the feeling that I hadn't had in so long of being so immersed in a book that I had to stay up all night to finish it. I was so immersed that I forgot that I was reading a book. It felt like I was in the world with the characters. I've just immersed the way I used to be every time I read a book as a kid. That is not something that happens to me very often as an adult. The readability, the ease, the accessibility, but then also the weaving throughout everything, the complicated world building and the themes and character work and character development over a long period of time, just really capturing you and capturing your heart and making you feel for the characters and so invested in what's happening to them. And in this book, I just don't feel that. I'm starting to feel a little more immersed now, in probably the last 10%, but I definitely haven't forgotten that I'm reading a book yet. That being said, I'm pretty sure that didn't happen in the first book, in the first trilogy, so maybe I need to give it some grace, but I have found the writing a little clunkier, a little more awkward. There's some passages that are quite repetitive. There was the start of a particular chapter where the same concept was introduced 3 or 4 times on 2 pages, and I just thought, okay, I get it. I heard you the first time. Can we move on now? And I don't remember that being a thing in the first trilogy. I'm noticing it less now that we're getting to the halfway point, but there's definitely been some kind of weird prose moments to me, some areas that just felt under-edited and a little bit like the point is being driven home over and over and over and over again. And maybe that's meant to be character work. Maybe it's meant to show that character is stuck in a loop. They are unable to move on from considering this one thing, or they're really anxious about something, or they're really trying to work up through a problem, and so they keep coming back to it. And that's fine as characterization, but it doesn't really feel like characterization. It feels like maybe something that the author's not even aware that they're doing. And it feels like something that an editor would have caught, And I, hesitate to say that that's why the book is 880 pages long, but some of that could have been cut, okay? You can tell us a thing, twice, fine, if you really must. But after that, please let's move on. It's not really on a sentence level, but on a conceptual level, on a few pages or few paragraphs level, it has come up a few times. The major example that really got to me was the start of chapter 3. So if you want an example, I'm not going to read it out loud because it's basically over the course of 2 pages. But if you have the book and you want to know what I'm talking about, the first 2 to 3 pages of chapter 3 and the number of times that the idea of this servant, this maid, doesn't think she's great at her job, wants to send her back, but she knows if she does that she would become a slave. And she obviously feels conflicted about that. But we get that idea given to us probably 4 times in 2 pages at the start of the chapter. We get it. Despite the fact that, some of the characters are starting to grow on me a bit more, or at the very least starting to get slightly less insufferable, I'm hoping that continues, because right now it's a little painful to not really feel like I'm rooting for any of the characters or really like anyone at all. And that's also making me feel like I'm less invested emotionally in the story than I was in the first trilogy. In the first trilogy, I really got attached to Fitz. I was really worried about him. And then there were so many other interesting characters to get invested in, especially the Fool. And so, I had so many feelings. I felt so strongly for the characters. I was so invested in their story. And worried about them all the time. And so far, don't really care. You know, if there's a storm and they fall off the ship, okay. You know, that's kind of where I'm at right now. The only place where I'm having an emotional reaction is in the dialogue around grief. The book starts with the grandfather of the youngest generation we're following being ill on his deathbed. And we meet him while he's very ill, and we witness his passing, and we see how his passing is impacting his wife, his children, and his grandchildren, as well as people who knew him, people who worked under him on the ship. He was the captain. There are some passages, some specific lines, some expressions of grief from various characters that feel very relatable to me. Lost my dad a year ago, and there are some things that Ronica has said that remind me of things my mom has said about losing my dad. And there are things that Althea has said, quite a few things actually, that I can very much relate to, especially around losing her dad, meaning that she lost the one person, or not, you know, in her case, the one person who had ever been proud of her and would ever be proud of her again. In my case, there are other people who are proud of me, but nothing feels quite the same as making my dad proud, you know? So there are some lines like that again get to me, but it's not that I'm feeling for the characters. It's that the way that his illness was described, his decline, the way that the characters were feeling about it, you know, Veronica thinking about how she was so excited for him to finally come home and just have time together and to enjoy each other. And then he was too ill. They got that time together, but they got it when she was caring for him and he was ill. And my mom has talked a lot about that. Anyway, it's not about me. The point is that the emotions I'm feeling are about my specific situation and how similar it feels at times. And on the one hand, that is, you know, there is a universality to grief. A lot of people reading this might have lost a parent or a grandparent or a partner. They might be able to relate to that on some level. So there is, you know, a level of skill. There is a level of tapping into a universal experience and expressing it in a way that resonates with me and probably with many people. But it is not crossing over from connecting to me because it reminds me of my own life experiences that make me sad to making me care about the characters. And it's pretty easy to get me to care about characters. I'm not gonna lie. I'm a very character-driven reader. I'm very emotional, and I really get invested in characters pretty easily, usually, if there's literally anything to grab onto. I feel for Althea because I can relate so much to her, but otherwise there's not a huge amount for me to grab onto with her. I'm finding her quite bland. Again, Ronica, I feel for her in the ways that she reminds me of my mom. I have so much empathy for her, but also she is being a dumbass. She's making such stupid decisions, and her ignorance around Kyle's true nature, and then again, shock at leopards eating her face is pissing me off because it's not just her that she's hurting, right? With her decisions. She's impacting everyone. That's where I'm at. I would be very curious to know your thoughts if you have read this. I would love for you to let me know if you also found it slow to start and struggled at the start, or if I am weird. But the world building so far feels a little, not sparse, but I feel like there was more world building in the first book of the first trilogy, and this is in the same world, so in some ways, some of that has already been done, but this is so far away from where we were in the last series, in the last trilogy, that I kind of needed a tiny bit more to orient myself. I feel like there are some things that I still don't understand about what's going on. And I'm sure some of that is intentional, but I just feel a little bit less anchored in the world than I did in the first trilogy at this point, 440 plus pages in. I think the magic is really interesting. The whole concept of live ships that are able to absorb a full life's worth of wisdom and knowledge and memories from 3 generations in a family to then quicken and come to life and have a consciousness and to be alive and be able to share that wisdom and be loyal to this one family is such an interesting type of magic. I'm really looking forward to seeing how that progresses. We have 2 live ships with names and personalities in the book. I certainly find one of them a little bit more interesting as a character than the other, in part because he's been sort of abandoned and is starting to forget who he is in a way. I think he might actually be my favorite. Paragon might be my favorite character in the book, actually, now that I think about it. This family that we're following, their live ship, so far she's also a little bland. I'm not gonna lie. It might just be the curse of this family in general, that they're all a little boring and annoying. Just me? I don't know. I imagine that they will grow and change, but I am struggling with the characters right now. I'm not gonna do a spoiler section for this first check-in. I know, who am I? Also, it's 440 pages. I have no spoilers to share. No, I do not, in part because basically nothing has happened plot-wise yet. a prominent character died, the next generation took over, we get a new captain of the ship quickens and becomes conscious. Multiple characters are on ships working, and multiple characters are on land grieving and managing the estate, reckoning with the change of patriarch. And I don't know if it's the point of view thing where because we're jumping back and forth so much that there just hasn't been a lot of time for each of the various point of view characters to actually get much development, but it just feels slow. I don't hate it by any means. I hate Kyle. I hate every moment that Kyle's on the page, but I don't hate the book. I also hate many moments that Kenneth is on the page, but again, he hasn't been on the page for a while. Although the next chapter has his name in the title, so I imagine he's about to come back. You know, it's not capturing me the same way that the first book in the first trilogy did, and I'm willing to give it the benefit of the doubt and to continue to push forward and to keep positive because I loved the first trilogy so much. I'm really hoping that the characters grab me, because in part, I feel like a lot of you who watched the original video were telling me that I would love this one, in part because there were more female characters, but also saying that the characters were amazing in this trilogy. I really hope that I end up agreeing with you on that eventually, hopefully sooner rather than later. But right now I'm feeling a bit indifferent, a little apathetic, kind of disappointing. But again, fingers crossed, I'm hoping, I'm hopeful. I think it will get better. I think it'll pick up. It already feels like it's doing that. It's just kind of baffling to me that it took so long. Probably well over 300 pages for me anyway. But, you know, maybe it's worth it. Maybe it's worth it. That's what people say. People say the trilogy is amazing, so I'm gonna believe you. No spoilers for the first half. I'm just gonna go finish the book. It will take me a minute because it's another 440 pages, but I'll be back when I finish it, and hopefully I will be raving about how great the book is, and it will have made me laugh and cry and feel all the feelings. We'll see. We will find out. I will be back soon, and I'll let you know. Please share your impressions of the first book in the comments so that when this video is out, I can read it and hopefully feel validated. Or maybe you had a completely different experience. That is also cool. I would like to read that as well. Okay, well, I'm done Ship of Magic. I have finished it. What a beast of a book. Listen, okay, listen. This had no right to be this long, okay? It makes no sense. It did not need, no. No. And the first trilogy, the books were long, okay? They weren't novellas, but I felt like the length, for the most part, made sense. Robin Hobb went off the rails with this one. This feels like almost 900 pages of setup, and that is not my preference. I don't love that, to be honest. I wanted to adore this. I wanted to fall right back into the world. I wanted to be so immersed. I mean, I've said that already. Unfortunately, that never quite happened for me. I felt for a while around the 45% to probably 60% mark that it was going to get there. And then it sort of fell apart for me personally. And the ending was fine. You know, the ending was what we knew was going to happen from, I don't know, very early on, maybe 20% of the book. And then we spent hundreds of pages getting there extremely slowly. So I didn't hate it, but I definitely didn't love it. That was a pretty frustrating reading experience, honestly. And it took me so much longer than it should have. I also fell asleep so many times in the last portion of this book. It didn't capture me, which sucks. However, I loved the first trilogy. There was enough here that I enjoyed that is keeping my hopes up for the rest of the series, as much as I feel that this is ridiculously long for what it is. And I'm a bit annoyed at how much time it took to get through it when it could have been done easily in half the pages and not felt rushed. Probably in even fewer pages than that, to be honest. I am hopeful for the rest of the series. I will obviously continue to read the rest of this trilogy, and I hope that Mad Ship and then Ship of Destiny will be worth the effort of this. So most of the things I have to say are the same things that I mentioned in my first update. Really, the biggest issue for me is the pacing. It is so slow. It is painfully slow. It is also quite repetitive same ideas come back again and again. Presumably the idea is that the characters are going to have a longer arc through the entire trilogy and not really necessarily have a huge amount of growth and change in at least the first book or maybe any individual book. And that is, fine. It's not my personal preference. As I've said many times, I prefer that each book in a series feels like it has its own thing going on, even if it relies on reading the rest of the series for context, even if the rest of the series has longer arcs and things that build upon each other. I prefer each installment to have its own mini arcs and its own satisfying conclusion of certain pieces of the puzzle. And to me, this did not do that. And, not everyone cares about that, but I personally do. I feel if I'm reading a whole book, I should get at least a couple satisfying arcs, even if I don't get every question answered, even if not everything is wrapped up, obviously, because it's part of a series. Especially when a book is almost 900 pages. The fact that this is so long makes me much harsher on it than if it was 300 pages and doing the same thing for obvious reasons. I think the audiobook at regular speed is at least 35 hours. That is ridiculous. This is very bloated. That is my opinion. The multiple points of view continue to be a little bit of a struggle for me. Again, normally that's fine. I read a lot of books with multiple points of view, so I don't have anything against that, but I really did feel like, despite the fact that this book is so long and so bloated, each individual point of view section was very short. The chapters themselves were quite long, but the point of view would change several times in a chapter, and we would sometimes only get a couple pages with a character before moving on. And so even though the book is ridiculously long, even though the chapters are very long, the book still had a bit of a choppy quality to it because you jump between different characters so frequently. But then even still, despite that, there were some characters who would not be on the page for an exceedingly long period of time. Althea disappeared there for most of the second half of the book. How's she doing? I don't know. She's gone. Did I think she was going to be the main character from the beginning of the book? Yes, I did. Goodbye. She's not relevant. I know she's going to come back. Clearly, I can see things that are being set up for her character, and yet she disappeared for a long period of time. Kenneth also felt from the beginning like he was going to be an extremely important character, and he does come back at the end. It does seem like he will continue to be an important character. And yet, again, he was gone for so long. I don't understand those choices, to be honest. And it's not like every character needs to show up at exactly the same, interval of pages and have the exact same amount of page time. But it just felt frustrating to me. That's the best word I can come up with for it. I also realized as I was reading, because this is in third person, I typically prefer third person over first person. I mean, I will read any person. It's fine. I don't really care about the tense. It's not a deal breaker for me, but typically I have found that I tend to enjoy third person more than first person, and I really like second person. I know people have opinions about second person, but anyway. The first trilogy, the Farseer trilogy, is in first person, but because it's in first person and it's just in one character's point of view for the whole trilogy in first person, I know that there are people who struggle with that, especially if they're not a huge fan of Fitz as a character. I enjoyed him, so it was fine. In this book, and I assume for the rest of the trilogy, it's in third person and we have many characters, and yet I would say that the way that the first trilogy is written, despite being in first person, feels like it has more narrative distance that you would typically expect from a third person omniscient kind of narration than I get in this book. And as I kept reading, I realized that distinction and realized why, despite the fact that typically third person is a little bit more to my taste, why I was struggling more with how this was being written and my access to the characters and their thoughts here than how I felt in the original trilogy, despite it being in first person. And the reason is that, spoilers, I guess, so I'll be very vague, but in the first trilogy, despite it being in first person, there is more reflection on the events. There's a bit more distance. It's more of a storytelling experience. Because of that, there's a little bit more commentary or thematic insight from the narrator, despite the fact that it's in first person. So you get access to Fitz and his internal thoughts and his experiences in a very intimate way, as you typically would in first person. But then you also have this distance and this insight and this reflection that I personally find really interesting and adds sort of a layer almost for the author or the narrative at large to give us further insight that Fitz might not have had in the moment, especially when he was a child. at the beginning of the trilogy. Whereas in this book, this is extremely close third person. The whole thing feels very tied to each individual person's perspective and understanding of the moment. So it does feel a little bit more immediate and intimate, like first person. And because of that, it kind of loses the extra narrative framing, that extra layer that you would typically get from third person, where there is either an omniscient narrator or, a character in the story that is narrating, or just a bit of a vehicle for the author to not necessarily explicitly break the fourth wall and just tell the reader stuff, but just to have that extra layer of, insight into the characters, because often characters don't know shit. They don't know what they're going through. They don't know how they really feel. Sometimes they do, but a lot of characters are not that self-aware. And so when you have a little bit more narrative distance, the story, the book can tell you things about the character that the characters don't know themselves. And that's something that I really enjoy. I like knowing things about the characters before they do, and then watching them figure it out. And I felt like this book robbed me of that because it was such close third person. And that is what I came to realize as I continued to read. And obviously that is very much personal preference. You might love that. And despite the fact that it did have a little bit more of that intimacy, we were very close to the characters, I just never really connected to them. Again, most of them I did not like. Most of them I found quite frustrating, if not outright infuriating. I don't know if I could say I actually liked any single point of view character. Althea started growing on me, but she was pretty absent in the last part of the book. Paragon is interesting, a little repetitive, a very little development for him, but he's an interesting character. Kennett is complex and has some layers, and I appreciate that despite the fact that he is a terrible person. And what's weird to me, I think, is that we didn't really see much of a transition for him, because at the beginning he was depicted absolutely horrifically. And I thought he was definitely going to be a villain, and it felt like he was being portrayed that way. And then as the book progressed, it felt like, I don't know, maybe he will be a villain later on. Maybe this is all a ruse. But by the end of the book, it felt like we were meant to like him and find him charming and kind of be on his side. I felt like we didn't really see enough of a transition for him for me to get behind that, to really be on board with that. Pretty much no other character did anything for me, if not actively pissing me off at every turn. I did a little bit of Googling because I was curious, especially about Wintrow, because my God, despite the fact that Kyle is an absolute piece of shit and obviously the absolute worst, Wintrow annoyed me even more. He was my least favorite character, and he really was essentially the protagonist of this book. I think he definitely had the most page time. And he was so dumb. Like, I get that he's a child, okay? Still, his naivete, his lack of growth, his lack of self-awareness and humility, his lack of any forethought or planning at any point, his lack of consideration of the consequences of literally any action was driving me up the wall. And then something would happen and he would just blame someone else, or just sit around saying, how could I have possibly known that this would happen? And now everything is terrible, but I did the best I could do. And I was thinking, no, you didn't. No, you didn't. You didn't even think about the bare minimum next step that would come after the choice or lack of choice that you made. Because again, one of the biggest things that annoyed me about him is his passivity. He makes almost no decisions through this entire book. He started to make a couple in 900 pages. Very few. So many of the things in this book are just things happening to him and him going along with it and feeling a type of way about the things happening. And then there are a couple significant moments where he has a choice to make and he just shrugs and lets fate do its thing. And then as soon as fate does do its thing, he gets angry about the direction it went. And it's like, my dude, you had a choice. You could have made a choice. You decided not to make a choice and then you got mad about what happened. That is on you. My friend. Like I said early on, I was emotionally invested in the grief plotline. By the end, it felt like no one was grieving anymore. That was no longer part of the story. So the one thing that was making me feel anything was just gone. It also didn't feel particularly realistic that none of these characters would be continuing to grieve. Multiple seasons have passed, so it's been months, but grief doesn't end in 14 business days. So I did enjoy the world building, the magic, like I brought up earlier. I think Robin Hobb has built a fascinating world here, and this part of the world is just as interesting as the part of the world we were exploring in the first trilogy. I do feel like there was some world building that I was craving for that we weren't getting yet, and I imagine that some of that is being paced out so that we can have more discoveries and more developments as the trilogy goes on. But again, that was just part of the larger issue for me, that this is very slow, especially considering how long it is. The magic is great. It is so interesting. I love the idea of the live ships. I love the idea of this wood that has a consciousness. And I hope that we learn more about where the wood comes from and how this magic actually works. But I love that. I love its connection to a specific family and the loyalty and, being a keeper of memories and wisdom over time and that bond that develops. We didn't just see one live ship as an example. We actually got to see 3 different live ships in 3 different circumstances with 3 different personalities, and that was very interesting to me, so I appreciated that. I did find our primary live ship a little bit annoying, just like most of the characters. Vivacia, she whines a lot, and I get that she was basically just born within the magic of the world, so she's kind of a child, but it got old. Like Wintro and Malta, also technically children, also were annoying me. Does that mean that it's good characterization because they feel realistic and they're annoying me with their realistic traits and flaws? Maybe. Did it make it fun to read 900 pages where most of the characters were pissing me off at every turn? Not necessarily, no. Like I said, Kyle's the absolute worst. I appreciated that he felt a little less prominent in the second half of the book, but he's just the worst. And I think he's a realistic villain. I think the ways that he is villainous, mostly being just an asshole, a terrible parent, a terrible spouse, arrogant, selfish, greedy, lacking in empathy, having anger issues, not being able to control or process his own emotions, being entitled, and also being a raging misogynist. All realistic traits. And that's kind of what made him the worst, because I couldn't think of him as a mega villain, a super villain from a fantasy with fantastical creatures and magic conscious ships, because he was just a regular dude who was an asshole. And he reminds me so much of real life assholes that I have known in my life and dealt with. And that made it really not fun in a very personal way that I did not really appreciate. Again, is that effective? Yes. Does it make it enjoyable to read? For me personally, not really. I also have mixed feelings about how misogyny is handled in this book in general. I will say that most of it, whether it is external or internalized misogyny, felt like it was being commented on, felt like it was there, clearly being framed as terrible and absolutely ridiculous. However, there were some depictions of female characters that felt a little misogynistic to me, especially near the end. Is kind of a spoiler, but 2 secondary female characters who have pretty important roles in the story meet very near the end. And it's immediately the 2 women vying for the attention of one man trope. We're jealous of each other. We hate each other. We're both gonna fluff our hair and try to be the one that the man chooses. And that is a misogynistic trope. I get that in real life, people do sometimes, vie for the attention of one person. But I do think that framing 2 of the female characters that way, especially when neither of them had been portrayed that way before that point, really rubbed me the wrong way, especially because one of them barely knows this person. The other person is in an established relationship with this man, and so, being jealous of him paying attention to another woman makes sense. The other character, however, has just met this person, doesn't know anything about them. It just didn't make sense to me. It felt like using a misogynistic trope for tension and for conflict, especially right near the end, so that it sort of sets you up that there's going to be conflict between them moving forward. And I just think, why not have them team up? Why on earth would I want to watch these characters fight over a man when they could just work together and both be badass and awesome together or simultaneously? That just doesn't appeal to me. And I don't, that's not enough for me to feel like the rest of the misogyny was handled poorly, because again, most of the misogyny was framed very much as this is misogynistic and that is bad. And these characters who are misogynistic are being shitty. And even these characters who are dealing with internalized misogyny are dealing with this because of the society they grew up in and the patriarchy they're living under, and they have been sort of indoctrinated into the system and they are working within it. And it sucks, but it makes sense, right? Again, does that make it super fun to read? Almost every character being misogynistic? Not particularly. I would love to read fewer books that, feature misogyny heavily, just because it's exhausting. Even if the fantasy is dark and dealing with dark subject matter, sometimes it's nice to escape the problems that I personally face in my own life. And so grappling with misogyny on almost every page is not much of an escape. I don't typically read for, escape in its entirety. I don't turn my brain off when I read, but, it was a lot. It was a lot. That's what I'll say. I think I'll do a brief spoiler section to talk about a couple of the things that stand out to me, just some final thoughts to wrap this up, but I don't want to go on too long. I just kind of want to keep reading and see what happens and see if that changes my perspective at all. I really feel like this doesn't, as ridiculous as that seems, doesn't really feel like an entire novel. It does feel like a setup, which is baffling, but I don't feel like it really did enough with character development, with plot, with themes for me to have a huge amount to say, unfortunately. So let's do a brief spoiler section. I'm going to talk about Ship of Magic, and then I'm going to move on to Matchship. So spoilers starting now for this whole book. You can skip them using the chapters if you so choose. So spoilers. Yeah, that ending. Edda meeting the live ship, Vivacia, and them immediately being jealous of each other and wanting Kennit's attention, staring each other down, and Wintrow thinking that Edda looks like a jealous cat who's about to hiss. Like, I just thought, okay, really? Do we need that? Did we need that? Edda turns into such a badass. She, like, as much as I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about her character early on, she seems to be a little bit trapped in the toxicity of their dynamic and seems to find his anger and abuse of her to be proof of his love of her, which is unfortunate. But she also has really grown as a character. She's become very interesting and complex. She has been very brave and interesting and stood up for herself, kind of gone off the rails and become a little unhinged and, bloodthirsty in a way that I didn't expect. She's a very interesting character. But then to turn it into that, I just thought, like, okay, yeah, you can be sort of protective of your relationship. That makes sense for her characterization. But again, it's a ship. It's not a person. So it just feels weird. And then for the ship, she met Kennit 5 seconds ago. And this whole time she's been thinking about how much she loves Wintrow and how sad it is that Wintrow doesn't seem to like her as much as she likes him. And she really wishes she could connect to anyone else who actually would want to talk to her, but she can't because she's connected to Wintrow and it has to be part of her family, on and on and on and on. But now the millisecond she meets Kennit, she feels connected to him. She's all like shy because he's flirting with her, and she wants to choose her own path and choose Kennit, and is jealous of his girlfriend. And it's just, why? Why are we framing them like that? I don't get it. I don't like it. Stop it. Stop that right now. The ending was fine. We knew that Kennit was going to end up on the ship, right? Like, we knew that was going to happen, especially once Kennit and his pirates started freeing slaves on slave ships, and then Kyle decided he was going to become a slave ship to make money, to pay off their debt. And Kennit was obsessed with getting his own live ship. It was very clear that was going to happen. It was dragged out for 900 pages, but we finally got there, and I just didn't feel anything about it. I thought, okay, that's what happened, and I expected that to happen. I can't believe Althea didn't get back by the end of this book. Is she not going to come back until the third book? Final couple chapters? I don't know. I was really hoping we would see her back again by the end of the first book, and we would sort of move on to other paths for the story to go down, but it seems like her getting her ship back might be an arc over all 3 books, which I don't know how I feel about that. I don't know if I love that, to be honest. I also feel like the Serpents story, every time they popped up, I just thought, oh, this again, because it just felt like they had the same conversation over and over again. Maybe that is thematically appropriate based on the fact that their whole storyline is that they're forgetting who they are and their purpose. So maybe repeating conversations makes sense. But for me as a reader, it was tedious to experience those conversations again and again, and for them to never really go anywhere. And again, I assume that will go somewhere by the end of the trilogy, but it just felt like if that could have been a little prologue with them and then had a couple serpents show up, in these various battles and scenes without having to have that same conversation happen over and over and over and over again. Personally, for my taste, the onshore storyline about Malta just being the brattiest preteen who continues to embarrass herself, continues to ignore what the adults in her life tell her, continues to get herself into trouble, was not my favorite. But I also couldn't get over how Kefria had that realization that Kyle was actually not a very good husband and maybe didn't actually respect her or see her as an equal partner or a person. And instead of that turning her angry and motivating her to sort of rein him in or wrest power back from him and take back her own destiny, she just kind of, which is what it seems like it's setting us up for, she just kind of becomes apathetic. Like, by the end, when she thinks about Kyle again, she's like, yeah, I don't think he really loves me. I don't really feel love for him anymore. But like, you know, he can do whatever he wants. I don't care. I wash my hands of everything. What's the point of loving people? What's the point of trying? I'm just thinking, okay, well, you have children. You also have a legacy, a family. You have a sister who is off who knows where. Like, do you want to try? Do you want to do anything now that you've realized that your husband is a dickwad, or no? Are you going to try to change anything, or are you just going to sit there staring at the wall? It seems like she chose option B. And then again, Veronica, my girl, the fact that she did not know that Kyle was an asshole and manipulated what her husband wanted on his deathbed to leave the ship to her son-in-law, thinking that would be better for all of them, and then was proven extremely wrong by Kyle being an asshole, which was clear from before, is mind-boggling. Again, I get that Kyle could have been the epitome of respect and deference to his parents-in-law before the passing of his father-in-law, and maybe she never saw it, but truly like zero intuition, manipulating things, and then again, shock at the leopard eating her face. She started growing on me because she does feel very pragmatic. She does feel like she's trying to fix it, unlike Keffria. It's still a massive freaking mistake, and I can't believe that she made that decision, but it is what it is, and at least she seems to be trying to do something about it. And I realize I've barely talked about Brashen. I just don't. He's fine. He's a pretty bland character. Maybe he'll get more interesting in later books. There were a couple cute moments between him and Althea. They had some tender moments that I thought were sweet. He seems like a generally pretty nice person, but he doesn't have a lot going on for me. Nothing really to talk about or to touch on. For Wintro, though, again, he is so insufferable for most of this book. He has no humility. He feels like he is so wise and he knows things no one else could know, and his values and his spirituality is better than any other belief anyone else could have. He has no willingness to accept that other people could live their lives differently and also not be, terrible human beings with no morality. Like, it's one thing to have your own beliefs and have your own convictions. That's great. However, it is one thing to have values, and it is another thing to be holier than thou and pompous and bring it up and condemn other people for just living their lives, getting their ear pierced as a sailor, because how dare they mar their body like that? Like, just leave people alone, Wintro. Just relax. Like, he was pissing me off. And then I think the story was trying to frame him in this way. It felt like, and maybe it's meant to be his view of himself, and, the long arc for him will be his realization that he actually has so much to learn. We have a little bit of an inkling of that, although I feel like we could have gotten a lot more in his first book, and there was some of that development that wasn't even really development. It just was a sudden shift that I found a bit unsatisfying, kind of like with Kennett, going from being kind of the worst and a tyrant and egomaniacal and misogynistic and all of this other stuff to suddenly seemingly the roguish hero with very little in between. For Wintro, he is very set on being a priest or a monk. He's very set in his ways. He's very sure about his beliefs, and that makes sense for someone who is raised the way he was and is young. And I would have loved to see him grapple with that or have a crisis of faith, especially when things get hard for him, and then watch him, if that was the way it was going to go, watch him find his way back. Because he does kind of go through that arc of a crisis of faith and then coming back to his beliefs, but it's done in the least satisfying way possible. He just goes from being very sure of himself, this is the way, this is the path, I know what's right, everyone else is wrong, to completely apathetic, completely disconnected, nothing matters, I'm giving up, what's the point? He talks to the ship, who reminds him, hey, you said that you were always going to be a priest or a monk. That's who you are. Why are you forgetting that? And he's like, no, that's over for me. Continues to be completely disconnected. And then he talks to a man, interesting, one of the slaves, who says basically exactly the same thing. And he's like, wait, you're right. I am that. And then he's just back to believing. And that's it. Like, we didn't get to watch that realization. We didn't get to watch the progression. And I feel like it would have tied into his previous flaws and foibles so well, because one of the things that really got to me is his arrogance and his lack of empathy. Ironically, I feel like when I looked him up to see what people were saying who were fans of the series, a lot of people said that what they loved about him is his compassion, his empathy, that he felt like the moral heart of the series. Maybe that happens later, because he had very little empathy for the slaves. And he does things to try to care for them. He tries to help them. It's not like he had zero empathy, but in his thoughts, he is judging, especially the slaves who have lost their motivation to try to escape, incredibly harshly, dehumanizing them. He's comparing them to cattle, to animals, to beasts. He is saying that they have lost their spirit. Maybe they never had a spirit in the first place. He's not sure on that, but they certainly have no will to fight back and to live, and so it's hard to feel bad for them. And then, once again, leopards ate my face. He becomes a slave through total passivity and inaction of his own because he had a choice and he chose not to make a choice. And then again, shock and awe that the thing that they said was going to happen happened when he didn't do anything to stop it. He then feels that same apathy and disconnect. He feels like it's hopeless. He feels like everything has become terrible. There is no way out. He can never go back from this. His life is over. And he doesn't have a lot of motivation to change it because he feels like, what's the point? He never once connects what he's feeling, to what the other slaves are feeling. And he continues later to dehumanize the slaves and compare them to cattle. And I just think this could have been tied together. It could have shown his crisis of faith and this apathy, and then his coming back to himself and refinding that core of his belief and his values, and that being tied to his realization that he was being an asshole, that he was judging them for something that he could not possibly understand, that he wasn't even trying to extend empathy and understand their situation. And now that he's lived it, he realizes what they're going through and how hard that is, and how trauma and a loss of freedom and torture and abuse and, outward dehumanization can lead someone to be disconnected, to lose hope, to be apathetic, because he experienced that himself. But again, that reflection never happens. And I just feel like that would have been much more interesting than externally someone saying, hey, you never stopped being a monk. And he's like, right, you're right. He's back to normal. And that was not as satisfying to me. The whole thing with him becoming a slave makes no sense. I'm sorry. He never thinks things through. He just does things and never considers what will happen next. The fact that he's on the ship and he thinks, okay, it's time to escape. Again, what was the purpose of him staying for so long through so much torture and suffering, only to finally, later on, when he's made some connections to some of the fellow sailors, made some friends, connected to the ship on a personal level, he decides now is actually the breaking point and I'm going to leave. And he spends his whole time sitting in captivity, waffling back and forth. Would it actually be worse to be a slave, or would that actually be better than going back to the ship with my dad? Maybe it would be better. And he doesn't decide. He just continues to go back and forth as if literal slavery would be better and be more likely to allow him to return home and do what he wants to do with his life than going back on the ship with his father, who is the captain of the ship and who wants him to take over after him as the captain of the ship. Which one do you think gives you more agency and freedom to move through your life? He thinks being on the ship under his father is literally as bad as slavery, which is baffling. But regardless, even if he decided that, even if he said, yeah, actually, I would rather go with slavery, I think that's going to work out better, makes no sense, but fine. If that's the decision he made, at least he could have made a decision, but he did not. He just thought, I'll just wait here and won't make a choice. And then his father's first mate comes by and sees him and he thinks, oh, perfect. Now I really don't have to make a choice because he'll definitely tell my dad that I'm here and my dad won't want me to be sold into slavery. So my dad will come get me and I'll go back to the ship, which again, like, okay, so that's the scenario you wanted to happen, but then you didn't do the literal easiest thing in the world to make that scenario happen, which is just tell them who your dad was because he's in this port right now, but fine. And then, of course, the first mate of his father, who we have history of hundreds of pages of hating him and torturing him, didn't tell his dad. Shocking. So then he's getting the slave tattoo, and as it's about to happen, starts begging and saying, no, my dad is this captain. No, my dad wouldn't want this to happen. And they're like, okay, well, you waited too long. Now the thing we told you was going to happen is happening. It's too late. And then he gets sold into slavery, and guess what? His dad is in this port, as he already knew he was, and is actively buying slaves, which he also knew he was doing. And he's now hopeful that his dad will buy him and bring him back to the ship so that he won't actually be a slave, because he's now decided it would be terrible to be a slave. But then what did he think would happen in the first place? If he wasn't deciding, if he thought maybe slavery would be better, if he knew his dad was there and was going to see him and was able to buy him and then could buy him as a slave, then he would literally be a slave, not just a prisoner on his dad's ship. How is that better? How did he think that was going to go? Like, there is no thinking through, like, past the very high level, do I want to work on the ship or do I want to be a slave? Which again, like, how is that a comparison? Who is actually taking that seriously as a choice to make? But regardless, it's not like he's never seen a slave before. It's not like he doesn't know how they're treated either. Anyway, I'm getting worked up. The point is, he doesn't think past that point at all. He doesn't think, what happens next? If I get sold into slavery, what happens next? And what happens next is you get bought by your dad because your dad is in port buying slaves. And then you're back at square one, except now you have a tattoo on your face and he has to give you permission to be free, basically, which is definitely not better. And then he acts like it's his dad's fault. Okay, dude, I can't. It makes me angry. It's so stupid. What is the point of that? It's manufactured conflict for no reason. And if the point is that Wintrow is actually very dumb, fine. I agree. But the story seems to be framing him as wise beyond his years and all of this stuff, and I don't see it. And maybe there's meant to be a disconnect there. Maybe I am misreading the framing of the book versus just the characterization, and maybe the rest of the trilogy will make that clear. But good Lord, did I struggle with him as a character. Every choice he made pissed me off. It just, dude, why? Why? That's enough of that. I mean, obviously what's going to happen is that Althea is going to come back. She is going to win her ship back, and Wintrow is going to either stay on because he decides he actually loves the ship and wants to be there, or he's going to go off and do his own thing like he always wanted to, you know, and find his happy ending. Maybe different from what he initially thought because he's grown up and now is an adult and has experienced so many things. And I imagine that Kennit will probably die at some point. I feel like he's just a little too reckless to survive for an extended period of time, but maybe not. I also feel like Paragon is going to get back on the ocean, and Amber's going to help him do that somehow, probably. And love that for him. Again, Paragon's probably my favorite character. Amber's great too. She didn't get a huge amount of characterization, but I liked her. I liked their dynamic. I would love to see Paragon back on the, I was going to say 7 seas, but I don't know how many seas are in this world. So however many seas are here. And you know, I think all those things will be satisfying. I think Kyle finally being dead would be great. I thought we were going to get that in this book, but I guess we're not allowed to have nice things, at least not in book 1. I would love for Malta to, I don't know, grow up a little bit. I'm sure she will hopefully grow up into a less insufferable person, but who knows with those genes. It'll be interesting to see what happens with the traders and with all the sort of political machinations that are going on and the new folks that are coming into town versus the old guard, and slavery becoming involved and how that's shifting the economy and how people are conflicted over the ethics of slavery and trading upriver and so on. All of that stuff I would love to see develop more, and I'm sure it will. But yeah, it does feel a little bit like we already know what's going to happen and how things are going to play out. I mean, maybe I'm totally wrong. Maybe you're watching this saying, Elizabeth, little do you know that you're completely off base. You actually know nothing. Could be true. But I do feel like there's a very clear path set out, and I could see us just following that. I'm not sure how satisfying that will be, although maybe I will be very surprised and that will be satisfying to me, or maybe it'll feel like it came out of nowhere and I'll be annoyed. Who knows? Despite all of my complaining, I did actually not hate the experience of reading this. I am hopeful for the rest of the trilogy. I think that's all I'm going to say. I'm sure I'm missing stuff. It's 900 pages. Not a huge amount happens in this book considering how long it is, but still a lot of things happen. There are just so many pages. It's impossible for a lot of things not to happen. Also, the reveal at the end that the man who took Althea's virginity in a sort of coercive, manipulative way was on the pirate ship with Kennit and now is on her family ship. And so whenever she comes back, she's going to have to see him again. I'm excited. I kind of hope she kills him. I like how my hopes for this series are just all of the people I don't like being murdered. But yeah, that's pretty much what I'm hoping for. So I think that's it for my spoilers for Ship of Magic. Please leave your thoughts on this book in the comments down below. If you're leaving spoilers, just write spoilers for Ship of Magic and then hit enter a few times so it's under the read more, so you don't spoil other people watching who might not have read the trilogy yet. But I'd love to read your thoughts. If there are things I didn't talk about that you want to talk about, please share them down below so we can chat more, because again, there's probably so much here that I didn't touch on, but it's just a lot, and I don't want this video to be 15 hours long. But I'm just gonna hop into Mad Ship and hope that I have more fun. The sun is going down. I'm going to hop into Mad Ship and see how it goes. Hopefully I enjoy myself more. Hopefully all of this setup is worth it. Currently, I'm a bit on the fence with my rating, probably around a 2.5 star experience for me. I think I'm going to round up to 3 because I do think there are so many interesting aspects to this. And I didn't hate the experience of reading it even when I was feeling frustrated. And I can see there being a lot of potential for this trilogy to go somewhere very interesting. That was an experience for sure. It's a book that I read. And I really hope that all the setup is worth it and we start seeing some payoff, because these books are long. Okay. Okay, I'm halfway through Madship, so let's talk about it. Obviously, because this is a direct sequel to Ship of Magic, there might be some things that I can't talk about without giving at least light spoilers for book one, including the fact that certain characters are still alive, survived book one. Even the non-spoiler section could have spoilers for Ship of Magic, the first book in the trilogy. I feel like you probably would have assumed that, but I just wanted to explicitly say that before I start talking. I am finding this much easier to read, not actually in the readability of the language, because I would actually say that the prose feels more elevated, and pretty noticeably so in this book compared to Ship of Magic. It feels more lyrical, it feels more poetic at times. I'm using my quotes tab so much more frequently. There are so many long passages that I find quite beautiful, not only because of the ideas they're exploring in the content, but the actual language being very beautiful to read. And I really didn't notice that much at all in the first book. I also feel like Madship is much more descriptive. There's a much stronger sense of place. And that was something that I felt was missing a little bit in Ship of Magic. I didn't feel like it still could be even more, because I'm a sucker for sense of place, for atmospheric writing. I would love to really get a sense of, the rocking of the ship. As someone who lived and worked on a cruise ship for a while, I know all too well what that feels like. And I just feel like even, the way that the sunshine feels when you're in the open ocean, and the smell of the sea, which is not the same as the smell of being on a beach. The smell of the ocean when you are in the middle of the ocean where it's very deep is just its own thing, and I feel like a lot of that is not coming to the fore, is not being highlighted. But I do feel like this is an improvement on book one in terms of its atmospheric or descriptive writing in general, but really just the writing feels like a huge upgrade. And I don't know if the idea is that book one is a lot of setup, book one is a little bit more accessible and readable, and once you get people hooked, you elevate it a bit and hope that they come along with you, or what the deal is. But this felt much more like what I remembered her writing being like in the first trilogy. I was a bit disappointed by the prose in Ship of Magic. I don't think I lingered on it too much because there were so many other things to critique, but I'm really enjoying the writing here. Interestingly, though, despite the writing being more elevated and complex and lyrical in this book than in the first book, I find this one so much more readable. It's so much easier to read for me. It has much more of a propulsive quality to it. I am much more engaged and immersed. And some of that is that I just read almost 900 pages of setup and getting to know the characters, and now we're kind of moving forward with the story. I am enjoying where the characterization is going, where the storylines are going in this book so far. I'm finding it very interesting. I'm definitely a lot more connected to the characters. I do still find some of the characters annoying. It does feel like they're all starting on their growth journey, which I very much appreciate. I think the plot is interesting so far. I think the way that the world is being expanded once again by bringing in another element, another culture into the story is interesting so far, although I do have a sinking feeling that situation is going to get very, very bad and be hard to read and quite dark, which I'm not looking forward to. I also love that characters who were mostly separated through book one are starting to converge again, and it seems like the storyline is coming back together. I feel like that is making it seem less like it's jumping around constantly, even though it's still following a very similar multiple point of view in pretty short snippets, jumping from person to person format, because a lot of the characters are actually together. It sometimes feels like a continuation of the same scene, but now just from a different person's perspective, or we follow them as they leave the room and go do something else. And it still feels more chronological and like there's a through line rather than feeling quite so jarring. The pacing also feels faster now. I guess plot-wise still the plot is moving pretty slowly, but it doesn't feel quite so glacial, at least, which I appreciate. Those are a lot of positives, and I do feel quite positive about this so far. There is one major critique I have of this book so far, though, which is that I'm not loving the direction that Hobb is taking the theme of misogyny, living in a patriarchal system, trying to achieve your goals and dreams and live your life while battling against misogyny, reckoning with internalized misogyny, all those aspects of the world that were present in the first book. And it did feel that those aspects were meant to be something that the book was critiquing, that it was exploring with characters like Kyle, who are depicted as being the worst and who are hugely misogynistic, and showing how multiple of the female characters are grappling with internalized misogyny because of the world they grew up in. And while I found it frustrating to read, a little hard to read in the first book, I did feel like it was generally well executed and well handled. However, in this book, it is starting to lean more than I personally would like into feeling like the book itself is perpetrating some misogynistic ideas or stereotypes, or even just very traditional gender roles in a way that I am not personally loving. I'm also trying to keep in mind that this was published in the late 90s. I feel like there were a couple moments in the first book that irked me a bit with how certain characters were described, especially multiple female characters and how they interacted with each other, and I commented on some of those, or at least one prominent example of that in my review of the first book, probably in the spoiler section. But I feel like that is continuing in a way that I don't love, and it is possible that all of that is going to be deconstructed and critiqued later on. But as of right now, a lot of that is on the page without being challenged at all by other characters or by the narrative itself, by the framing of the story. So things like basically all of the female characters who we are meant to see as admirable, strong, powerful, independent, interesting, are not like other girls. They are women who are not living their lives according to traditional gender roles to varying degrees, but characters like Althea not only is spending a lot of time dressed as a man, as a boy, but also just has very few traditionally feminine traits. Every time we learn more about her, we learn the ways that she doesn't feel that traditional femininity, traditional womanhood aligns with her values and what she wants out of her life. And that is fine, right? That's totally fine. However, we then see that same example from pretty much every other female character. Edda is a very strong, powerful woman who is coming into her own and taking on a powerful position, taking on more responsibility, as Kenneth is maybe stepping back a bit because of events at the end of the first book that have impacted him. And she is also depicted as extremely unfeminine. She is described many times as being, not being particularly curvy, being very tall, having short hair, being violent and aggressive and extremely confident, and just not having a feminine feeling to her, not being particularly feminine in a traditional sense. So, okay. Then we get Ronica, who is maybe more in the middle, but obviously has spent a lot of her life doing things that are now in modern society, in this world, not considered to be feminine, not considered to be in the realm of a woman's responsibility, taking care of the estate and finances and so on, in a way that has fallen out of fashion. And so she also doesn't have maybe the most traditional feminine traits. And it almost feels like the book punished her for the one time that she did kind of step back and try to take a more feminine role by passing on a lot of that responsibility to her son-in-law. That came back to bite her in the ass and seemed to be sort of her biggest mistake that she's now trying to undo, giving up some of that more masculine role that she had taken on. We get the introduction of a new character, Cirilla, who is depicted as incredibly intelligent, uninterested in having a sexual or romantic relationship with the ruler that she serves. Unlike every other woman with the same position as her, any of the other heart companions have forgotten what it was meant to be, what the role was meant to be, and are all basically just part of a harem for this ruler, and they've been chosen for their sexual appetites and acumen, and she is the only one who won't give in to his advances and is actually interested in talking about strategy and politics and being an advisor to him politically. And it's very heavily pointed out by the text that she is the only one who is doing that. Again, very not like other girls. And then the characters who are more traditionally feminine, like Malta and Kefria, are depicted as frivolous or silly or less intelligent or somehow evil or manipulative. And that they're using their, especially for Malta, using her feminine wiles to manipulate people, despite the fact that she's literally a child. And then characters like Kefria, who's depicted as being very passive, very weak-willed, and they are by far the most feminine female characters on the page. And we also get more moments of, jealousy between women, fighting over a man. And we literally get a line near the beginning of this book that actually shocked me from Wintrow's perspective. That was, he would not make the mistake of thinking that she had been defending him from Etta. No, that exchange had been about the struggle for dominance between the two females. The struggle for dominance between the two females. Try to be more dehumanizing and objectifying, challenge impossible. Because, oh my God. And I get that that's from Wintrow's perspective, and he's a very young boy living in a misogynistic world, but Robin Hobb still chose to write that. We also get several examples of internalized misogyny, especially from Althea. She literally calls herself a slut. At least later, that is challenged somewhat by another female character, Amber, but still, don't love that. We also get a weird scene with Althea where she has another suitor, another trader son who's interested in her, and she explicitly expresses that the fact that he is very respectful and more measured in his approach, and that he's the kind of person who would ask for permission to kiss her, is a turnoff for her, and that she would never want to kiss. I think she explicitly says that she would never want to kiss someone who asked if they could kiss her first, which, on the one hand, everyone can have their own preferences. People like what they like. However, it is, I believe, a little bit of a sexist idea that women only ever want to be taken and men should only ever be taking, that it can't be a mutual decision. First of all, that the woman can't be the pursuer, but also second of all, that it is unsexy somehow for a man to be respectful and thoughtful and get consent first. Again, people have their different preferences and that's fine. It's not automatically sexist to be less a fan of explicitly asking for consent and more a fan of, a dominant partner who takes things into their own hands, but it just is one piece of the puzzle that adds on to everything else and reinforces a very gendered split, especially when it comes to sexual dynamic. And it's odd for Althea because she is so not like other girls and she struggles so much with traditional femininity and is constantly pushing back against that. And yet she very much wants to fill the feminine role in her sexual relationships and wants to be pursued. And that, again, that is something that I think is starting to be deconstructed in that same conversation with Amber, very close to where I stopped. So I don't know if it continues on from there, but Amber kind of confronts her for that and points out that she wants that because she wants to not be responsible for making the choice. She doesn't want to feel like she is being a slut, as she called herself, for giving in to a man's advances. If he just takes what he wants, then she can surrender. She can also get what she wants without having to ask for it, without having to admit that she wants it, without having to be a bad woman in that way. And that's sort of the one that, purity culture, that misogyny to do with women being allowed to be sexual creatures and to want and to desire and to ask for things that they want sexually is maybe the one thing that she's still holding on to, that to do with traditional gender roles and femininity. And maybe the intention is that she is going to work through that and come out the other side. It does seem like maybe that's starting because of the conversations having with Amber. So at least it's being somewhat addressed, but it was just another piece of the puzzle that was leaving me feeling like this book was doing a little bit of a worse job depicting its female characters in a way that felt like it was defying stereotypes. It feels sort of like it's reinforcing stereotypes in a way that it maybe doesn't intend. Oh yeah, I'll just read these quotes very quickly. She had been pretending he had been infatuated with her when he bedded her. The truth was that she had been behaving like a slut, and she'd found the partner she deserved. Yikes. Talking about herself. There was no way to share with him the thought that had suddenly flashed through her mind. She knew with vast certainty that she would never desire to be kissed by a man who had first asked her permission. So again, I am open to things changing. I do think characters like Malta, who is definitely the most glaring example of traditional femininity and that being depicted in an overwhelmingly negative light, that the fact that all of her interests lend to her being silly and frivolous and duplicitous and manipulative and so on. I do think that might be starting to shift. Literally as of the last couple pages of the last chapter I read, it feels like Malta is having a bit of a shift, that she's starting to grow up a bit, that she is going to take responsibility for herself in a way she hasn't before, and we're going to start to see her journey there. I would love, as she grows and evolves, for her to continue to be traditionally feminine, so that there is at least one example of a traditionally feminine woman from within this world who is also a good moral person, who is strong and brave and courageous, who we can get behind. If as she grows and becomes a better person, she also becomes less feminine, again, that's going to feel like it's reinforcing this maybe unintentional idea that to be an amazing, awe-inspiring, incredible example of womanhood, you have to be the exception, not the rule. And I'm bringing this up not because I want to pick apart the book, not because I want to be extra hard on it. It is a book written by a woman about many, many female characters. However, I think if a book is being celebrated for being a book that has many strong female characters, if a book is being celebrated for its feminist themes, for its exploration of the experience of living as a woman in a patriarchal or misogynistic society, I think it's important to ask how the book is actually examining those themes. How is it actually depicting its female characters? What about them makes them strong? Are there any ways that the storytelling is reinforcing and reproducing patriarchal assumptions? Does the narrative itself ever reinforce the very idea it's meant to be critiquing? And I think in some places, unintentionally, I believe, yes. Now, again, every single one of those examples might be disassembled and critiqued later on as some of Althea's internalized misogyny and slut-shaming is starting to be critiqued and broken down, and I would love to see that. But I am finding myself cringing at some of the descriptions of the characters being the only one who won't have sex with this powerful man, or the only one who doesn't want to get married and have kids, or, characters who find their strength as they shed their femininity. Like Edda, the more of a prominent character she becomes, the more of a strong character she becomes, the less feminine she is, the less she is described in traditionally feminine ways, the less she presents herself as feminine. And again, that can happen. There's nothing wrong with presenting yourself in a less feminine way. That's not inherently anti-feminist, but it is an interesting pattern to notice as it continues, and continuing to see female characters who are at each other's throats and in competition with each other. Examples that I've already given, but also examples of Malta and her best friend, or even between Kefria and Althea. I just feel that it's a little bit counterproductive to, I think, the ideas it's trying to explore. So I'm keeping an open mind. I would love to see more of those ideas dismantled as the book continues, but I wanted to bring that up because it's definitely irking me more and standing out to me more than it did in the first book. I think, there's more overt misogyny in the first book. I mean, there's overt misogyny in this book too. There are misogynistic, just outright incredibly misogynistic characters in this book, and I have a feeling that it's going to get worse. But so far, there is maybe less overt misogyny, but there is more sort of subtle reinforcing of gender roles and subtle misogyny in the way that characters are being framed. And again, that's just my interpretation. And that might change as I continue to read the book. I don't want to go through all of the characters individually necessarily, because my thoughts on them are generally the same as in the first book, although I will say that pretty much every character is getting more interesting. I feel like the first book really did set them up, and kind of everyone stayed pretty stagnant in the first book for the most part. But in Madship, it feels like the floodgates have opened and suddenly we're allowed to sink a little deeper into the psyches of the various characters, and that is making them much more interesting. I feel like the relationships are deepening as well, and there's more complexity. We're learning more about the backstories of several characters, which is adding a lot more nuance to who they are and how they react to things and how they express themselves and what they value, including a really interesting tidbit that explains a little bit of why Kenneth is so obsessed with the idea of being the pirate king and seems so egomaniacal. So that has been really interesting. I really appreciate that, and I'm looking forward to that continuing, hopefully. I am very worried about Cirilla based on the last scene we had with her, and I am scared about how that's going to go. I had seen content warnings for this trilogy, and I'm feeling things are about to get very harrowing and very dark. And I can't say I'm looking forward to that. I'm actually quite scared of how it's going to be depicted. I will say that some of the unexpected pairings between characters are very interesting. Especially, I'm very curious to see the development of Wintro and Kenneth's dynamic. I'm very interested to see how that develops. I could see it going multiple directions, some of which I am afraid of, to be honest. But yeah, I think that's it. I think I'm just going to keep reading, and I'll be back when I get to the end. Maybe this will become a pattern where I save spoilers for the end of each book. But again, even though this one feels like it's moving faster, the pacing feels better to me. Part of that is just that I'm much more immersed now and invested in the characters and what's happening to them. Because honestly, the plot is there's still not that much going on with the plot. It is very slow. Not always a bad thing. I mean, I've read books that I would describe as literally entirely plotless, and I've had a great time. I don't necessarily need a huge amount of plot, but these books are quite long, so we'll see where it goes. We'll see where it goes. Well, I finished Madship this afternoon, and I'm gonna be honest, I literally immediately started Ship of Destiny. That is both a plus and a minus, because on the one hand, I needed to continue right away. I needed to know what happened, so I read the first couple chapters of Ship of Destiny because I had no ability to stop myself. However, on the other side of it, it's a sign of something that I really find frustrating in series, which is when it's basically just one long story that's been chopped up into parts instead of feeling like each installment is their own thing. And I'm not going to harp on it because I already talked about that with the first book. It was one of the reasons why I ended up giving the first book 3 stars, why I struggled with it, because it was really just set up for the rest of the trilogy. And this was a much better book, in my opinion. This book, took that setup and did something with it, and it was more fun and more immersive and faster paced. More was happening. The character development was developing. The relationships were getting more interesting. However, that ending was so abrupt. And when I started Ship of Destiny, it just picked right up. And I just thought, this is one book that was cut into 2. And honestly, the whole trilogy feels like one book, one massive book that was cut into 3. Obviously, my plan was to read them back to back anyway, but typically I prefer to be able to take a break in between books in a series if I so choose. And I feel like series like this really don't allow you to do that. I can't imagine trying to read these as they were being published. I think they were published very close together, but even still, if you had to wait any period of time, that would have been extremely annoying. But anyway, again, I realize that doesn't bug everyone, so that might not impact you at all. I just find it annoying, personally. It felt very abrupt. However, I do feel like the second half of this was better than the first half. I already thought the first half was leaps and bounds better than the first book in pretty much every way. To be honest, the writing was better. The prose was more beautiful. The descriptive language was taken to a new notch where it was much easier to actually envision the environments. I still feel like the characters are not described at length, which isn't a huge deal, but I would prefer to know a little bit more about what the different characters look like. I feel like the descriptions are pretty vague. But regardless, the environments, the places, even specific rooms are being described to greater detail than they were in the first book, which I appreciate. The language is more scrumptious. There are more quotes that I enjoy. There's a lot more beautiful language to appreciate, and the pacing ramped up ridiculously. Even the political side of things and the way the world building was being expanded and what we were learning about the magic, just everything exploded. And I still don't think that we needed 900 pages to get us ready for this book, but I am more willing to accept that because this book was so much higher quality. I also don't know why the first book couldn't be written like this one was. It truly felt like a huge difference to me in terms of the quality of the prose, which I found strange. Like I said, the characters are continuing to grow. They're revealing a lot more complexity and depth. I still had moments of being frustrated by the way the book was framing the female characters, and I do think there is something to be said about how the series seems to be interested in analyzing as a greater theme, misogyny, experiencing life as a woman under patriarchy, all those things I talked about in the first half. I imagine that will continue in the last book in the trilogy, and I might save my final thoughts until I finish the whole thing and I really see how that arc concludes, because some of my issues from the first half I felt like started to be addressed, started to be pushed back against by the characters themselves or by other characters, and I did appreciate that, but I do still think there were quite a few moments of framing that didn't feel as intentional, felt a little bit like they were reinforcing negative stereotypes, or felt a little bit like they were reproducing the very dynamics that they were trying to critique. And again, I brought up examples from the first half, and I don't want to get too in the weeds about it because I would like to finish the trilogy before I really get into it again. It did become easier to handle, but there were still moments like, talking about the ship, well, she's enough of a woman that I can understand her. It's like, what does that mean? What does that mean? I could go through every time I used my misogyny tab and talk about all the examples and continue in this vein for probably another half hour or more, but I feel like that's not the best use of my time or yours. I am going to put a pin in it. I'm going to wait till I get to the end. I'm going to see how everything progresses, and then we'll come back to it. And I'll share my thoughts at the end. So I wanted to mention that it does get better. There are fewer moments like that. It does feel like the book starts to address some of those things, but it doesn't disappear entirely. But I did really love how everything started to come together, connections being made, reveals starting to happen. It just felt like, again, all that setup was starting to pay off. That being said, I'm going to jump into spoilers. Most of what I want to talk about is going to be spoilery for this book, but then also for the entire first book, obviously, as things start to come together. And I will give you a bit of a rundown for the major characters and how I'm feeling about them and some of the other things we're learning. So spoilers are about to start. So spoilers for Madship and Ship of Magic starting now. Skip this using the chapters if you don't want to be spoiled. Okay, so basically, love that everything is coming together. Love that we are starting to learn way more about the dragon lore, about the live ships, about the Elderlings, about River and the civilizations that were there before. All super fascinating. I love the idea that the ships themselves are some way, somehow dragons. That they are former dragons, that they are made of, essentially my reading of it, unless I'm misunderstanding what this is laying down. My understanding is that the live ships are basically carved out of cocoons of dragons that were in hibernation or in the process of transforming. And so essentially the live ships are murdered dragons where their consciousness has now been trapped in an inanimate object. I mean, I guess they're animated because the actual figurehead is animated, but they are trapped in this ship. And their life has sort of been stolen from them, which is quite horrific, but also very interesting. And I'm excited to see how that progresses moving forward and how these characters, how the live ships react to this knowledge as they learn it. Also, I love the treehouse city. Fantastic. Amazing. So cool. Loved all the descriptions. I hate heights, but I loved reading about it. It was fantastic. It was amazing. I would spend a whole trilogy, multiple trilogies in the treehouse city. Please, someone tell me that happens. Later on in the series. All the dragon lore starting to come together. So interesting. Love that it's tied to the live ships. Also love the idea of drowning in memories, the, certain dragons being the keeper of memories, certain serpents being the memories, helping the serpents understand their destiny. They are meant to transform into dragons, and that doesn't just impact fellow serpents or dragons, but that it also impacts others who come in contact, and that it can essentially drive you mad to have all of those memories poured into you. And it's very interesting. I don't know how I feel about the idea of Malta. Obviously, she started to have a bit of a transformation. She was growing up. She was changing before this point. But I don't know how I feel about her maybe ultimate shift in character potentially being tied to an external force of basically having her brain corrupted by this, drowning in memories procedure from a dragon, that might impart almost some of the dragon's memory, personality, and experiences and wisdom and so on onto Malta, and that might be part of her transformation, rather it being more internally motivated. Obviously, people can change based on external things. That can be fine, but she's such an interesting character, but also such an infuriating character, and she's so young that I was really looking forward to her transformation just sort of naturally through adolescence. Speaking of adolescence, I am very disturbed by the age gap between her and Rain. I get that it's fantasy and not real. I also get that the setting is meant to be, sort of middle ages inspired. However, she is 12 at the start of this series, probably 13 now, 14 maybe, and he is almost 20 is what his mother says, I think, in the first book, so maybe 20 years old now. 19 and 12, 20 and 13 or 14, no. And it just makes it so much weirder and grosser that he can't stop saying that she's actually fully a woman. And everyone else is like, no, pretty sure she's still a child. As soon as you talk to her for more than 5 minutes, you're going to realize she's a child. He's like, no. I know best. She is a woman. Take it from me. She is a grown-up and ready to be wed. What are you talking about? Why could he not have been 15? Or 16, especially because they say that their people tend to get married, have children very young because their lifespans are shortened because of the toxicity of the river. Why could he not have been of a regular marriageable age for their society, 15, 16, whatever, and be just a couple years older than her? And they could still be, her family could still be against the idea of her getting married because for them, in their society, she's still too young. She hasn't come out yet. She's not a woman yet. So they're still against it, even though they're actually not that far apart in age. I don't know why we needed the huge age gap. It makes me uncomfortable. And it annoys me too, because I think they're an interesting couple. I think they have an interesting dynamic. I'm kind of rooting for them in terms of personality, except for the times where he treats her like a child and then she points out that he's treating her like a child. And then he says, well, you are young and I need to protect you. And she's like, okay, well then but you keep saying I'm a woman, so which is it? And he stumbles around and has nothing to say because she's right. I hate that. Why do we need that? What was the point? What is the reason? And I feel like otherwise I'd be rooting for them. So I'm annoyed that I have to deal with this and I cannot forget how old they are. And I can't feel that it's not weird, Malta's interesting though. Her development is great. I loved her sassiness at the end. I'm excited to see what she does in the next book. I am really hoping she seems to still be holding on to some of her more feminine qualities while also sort of growing up and not being a preteen anymore. So hopefully that will continue because like I said, I would love for her to be the example of a more traditionally feminine woman so that we at least have one who gets to be prominent and who we get to see as someone who's strong and interesting and valuable and contributing. Not to say that other characters aren't. I would say Kefria is also getting some really good development. Her offer to spy for them and to risk herself to help them and her struggling with what that means and struggling when her kids go missing, when there's the collapse, and feeling like her making the decision to leave her children behind in safe care, but to leave them behind to try to help the greater cause was her somehow going against her role as a mother, that she wasn't grateful enough for her children, and that is why she's being punished and why her children are missing and presumed dead. And I loved the response from Rain's mother, whose name I can't remember now because it's late. No, pretty sure women are more than just mothers and you're allowed to be a person outside of motherhood, but you're not somehow a failure of a woman for having other things that you care about too, and for existing outside of just being a mother. So I appreciated that. I appreciated Kefria sort of stepping up and being part of the conversation and, having a little bit more agency in her own life. I'm excited to see more development for her in that area as well. I feel like Ronica is also kind of becoming a badass. I mean, she was already a bit of a badass, just also was making very stupid decisions that were annoying, that she should have known better. But she is also sort of coming out of her shell. So that's great. I appreciate that. Wintro is also less annoying, mostly because he's in this book less. If Wintro has no haters, I am dead, apparently. He's now moved on. I get that he's young. Okay, again, I get it. You don't have to tell me. I think he's, 14 now, maybe 15. I get it that he's a child still, but still. And that he needs a father figure because his dad is the worst. I get it. However, him going from being the most holier than thou, not allowing himself to laugh at a tawdry joke, and fully just believing that Kenneth is essentially God's tool on earth and thinking that everything he does is for the greater good of everyone and he only has good intentions and is basically a saint, and going around using his ability to speak like a monk to sway people to Kenneth's side. And it's just, okay, I get it. He's naive. He's still young. I understand the reasons for it. It's just still annoying. He's so annoying. I'm sorry. I can't get on board with Wintro. I'm glad he was in this book less because he annoyed me so much in the first book. I'm going to need him to get some of that grow up serum that Malta was getting at the end of this book because I've had enough. I do think a lot of the weird stuff that's rubbing me the wrong way, a lot of the things that feel like they're reinforcing stereotypes, seem to be surrounding Edda and Edda saying things to other people, or comparisons other characters are making between her and other women, or just talking about her as a woman. And there might be a greater point to that moving forward, but it does make me a little frustrated with Edda as a character because it feels like she's being used to reinforce some misogynistic ideas. However, she is an interesting character. And I do like her. I do think she's being manipulated to within an inch of her life by Kenneth. I thought for a while that she was seeing through it. Then I wasn't so sure. Now I think maybe she's going to see through it again. Still not so sure. Either way, I want her to leave Kenneth behind because he clearly does not appreciate what he has in Edda. Kenneth is a fascinating character as well. I wish that he was a little bit more sincere in moments, and there are moments where it seems like the sincerity is coming through. But the thing is, I literally can never tell if he's being calculated and manipulative or not. There are a couple moments where I thought maybe there was a genuine moment of connection happening, and then it was the rug was pulled out from under me. And then there were some moments where I could tell from the beginning of the scene that he was heavily trying to manipulate everyone around him. And fine. Characters are allowed to be calculating and manipulative. I do feel like even calculating and manipulative people have moments of sincerity and honesty, and maybe some of those moments were sincere. I do feel like the narrative is not giving me as much access to that reality, and maybe part of it is meant to be that he doesn't even know himself, that he can't acknowledge any of his sincere feelings, that he's built up too many walls, traumatized, and maybe that will come full circle. But currently, while I find him very interesting, I am struggling, feeling like there could be more complexity and depth there if we got to see behind the curtain occasionally. And maybe we are meant to be doing that, and I'm just reading everything as manipulative because of how he's being characterized. I do appreciate that at first in this book, it felt like it was trying to reframe him as the most charismatic, fun-loving guy who actually is great and everyone loves him. I appreciated that the narrative sort of came back around to saying, well, maybe not. Maybe he is still egomaniacal, because that switch up I was struggling with. We are very slowly learning his backstory, and I think that will explain a lot about him. I would love to get a little bit more. While the pacing picked up a lot and there was a lot of development, I do feel like Kenneth, even though he was in the book quite a bit, it felt like, we learned more about him than we knew in the first book, but somehow it felt like every time you learn something, I knew less about him at the end. I just feel like he's still very opaque as a character, even as we learn more and more. So I'm hoping in the third book, he'll get cracked open like an egg, because as a character-driven reader, I love psychoanalyzing characters, and I feel like I don't have enough access to him yet to do that. Althea still feels like a minor character. Please, for the love of everything in the universe, can she be a bigger character in the third book? I really thought she was being set up to be our protagonist. She feels so minor in this story, and it feels like it should be her story, getting her ship back, and yet so often she's not really around. And so much of her story is about her love story with Brashen, and Brashen's fine. He's fine. He's very milquetoast, but he's fine. Happy for them if they work it out. Hope they do, Happy endings for everyone. However, I don't care about that nearly as much as I care about her getting her ship back. And it just feels like that story is getting a lot of side quests where she does not feel like the main character. And that's kind of annoying me a little bit. Maybe I'm overestimating how big of a character she's meant to be in the story, but it really felt like it was being set up that she was our hero and the quest was getting her ship back from her evil brother-in-law. Literally all my notes on Brashen are, sure, nice guy. So there you go. Not making much of an impression. Amber, however, I freaking love Amber. She was already such an interesting character in the first book. In this book, she spent the first half calling Althea out on her, self-directed, internalized misogynistic shit and slut-shaming over and over again. Love that for her. But as the book continued and it became very clear that she is the fool, my favorite character from the first trilogy, I lost it. I was so excited. I mean, I had an inkling, I had a feeling, there was a vibe in the first book, but this book really confirmed it for me. Love that. Love getting more of the fool. Even if I'm totally reading into those hints and it's not the case, although I think it is. But even if it weren't, Amber is such an interesting character. She's so compassionate. She's so thoughtful. She really is an outsider in so many ways, and she has a very different perspective than everyone else. But also, she has absolutely the best lines. So much of the gorgeous prose in here, so many of the best quotes in here are her dialogue. I love the way she speaks. I love the way she formulates her thoughts and ideas. I love the way she calls everyone out on their shit all the time. She speaks in such a beautiful lyrical way. She has so much wisdom and insight and so much compassion and thoughtfulness and willingness to put up with other people being difficult and traumatized and struggling and willing to be that safe space for them to start to heal and have that connection that they really need, especially for Paragon. Their relationship is so beautiful and I love it so much. And she's so kind and personable while also being blunt and telling it like it is. And I just love her so much. She's the best. She's the best. I love her. Paragon, also still one of my favorites. He's getting more and more complicated and we're also learning more about his backstory over time. And he's just so traumatized and it's tragic. He's been through so much. He's not okay. And people are afraid of him and they treat him like he's almost like he belongs in a circus sort of thing. Like he should be gawked at and like he's not a person who has been deeply harmed by what's happened to him. And I feel like Amber is one of the few people who consistently comes back to him with compassion and understanding, even when it's difficult. And I feel like all he wants and needs is that connection, is people who trust him, who are not afraid of him, who expect the best of him and are clear about it when they're disappointed when he doesn't do his best, which Amber does. Him feeling safe enough to open up and be vulnerable and make those connections again. And I want that for him. And I really hope that Amber is able to bring that out of him. I'm gonna get emotional. I love him so much. I love them together so much. Kyle, love that he's irrelevant. Love that he's gone, stuck on an island with Kenneth's mom, trapped in the basement. Good. Good. I also love that everyone has been worried about Kyle this whole time, although they've now kind of stopped talking about him. Maybe they've realized that life is actually better with him not being around, but everyone was so worried about Kyle, especially Malta, but she just did not care at all about Wintro being missing. I realized they didn't really grow up together, but it's funny to me. Rain, I already talked about him. He's winning me over. He's an interesting character. I actually think that he and Malta are very well suited personality-wise, but the age thing is weird, and it makes him seem incredibly creepy and predatory, and I can't get over that. It is very strange. It's very strange. Do I have any predictions for the last book? Malta and Rain are gonna get married. Wintro might sacrifice himself for somebody, for Kenneth, for Althea, for Vivasha, for somebody. Ronica might also sacrifice herself for somebody. Kefria is going to come into her own and sort of take over as the head of their family. Althea will become the captain of Vivacia again, or for the first time. She and Brashen will get together and somehow make it work despite living on their separate live ships. They'll go on little jaunts and then come back together in between. And or Paragon will sort of be released somehow, maybe be turned back into a dragon if that's even a possibly do, or have his consciousness transferred somehow so he can be at rest. Amber's gonna go off, continue to be a badass, of course. Kyle will die, or everyone will just forget about him. I think Kenneth will probably die too. Like I said after the first book, I don't know how he's still alive. I just feel like, based on the kinds of decisions he's making and the life he leads, I just think he's gonna die. That's what I think. I guess I also didn't talk about Cirilla. I don't really have much to say about her yet, to be honest. I think the way this book, I appreciate that the way this book handled her sexual assault felt respectful and measured, and it was not explicitly on the page, and yet the trauma was really felt and very present and very much had an effect on her. I can't say that she as a character is really doing much for me. Maybe that will change in the next book and she'll have more to her character, but I do appreciate the way that was handled. I had heard that this trilogy was really rough for sexual assault, and I was expecting to have to read some of those scenes on page, and I was very grateful that they weren't, but that the book still spent enough time on how much that impacted her and how horrific it was and how that is going to be with her for the rest of her life. It felt like it gave it enough weight and time, but also didn't force us to read it, which I appreciated. It was still very upsetting to read without having to read it in excruciating detail. But as a character, I'm still sort of waiting for her to come into her own, which maybe will happen in the next book. I think that's it. I think I'm going to stop. Those are my thoughts on Madship. I enjoyed this quite a bit. I do feel like my issues with the way misogyny is being handled so far, and also the extremely abrupt end that just felt like cutting a book in half, took away from the experience somewhat. And then also some of the choices with some of the characters that I complained about more in depth in the spoiler section. Some of the characters that I hoped to spend more time with kind of not being present. Some of the more annoying characters continuing to be unnecessarily annoying and focused on when they are less interesting than other characters. This was still a very good book. I enjoyed it a lot. I'm probably landing around 4 stars for this one, so better experience than book 1. So if things are looking up, 3 stars, 4 stars, maybe book 3 will be 5 stars to cap off the trilogy. I would personally love that. And maybe in retrospect, once I finish book 3, I will look back with more fondness on especially book 1, but also book 2. Maybe seeing how everything comes together will, shift my perspective a bit. But right now, I'm saying Madship is a 4-star read. I had a lot of fun with it. And like I said, I immediately dove in to Ship of Destiny, and I'm gonna get back to it because it's another 900 plus page book. Because of course it is. Robin Hobb has no chill and is not concise, and I can relate, but also, girl, my God. So I'm gonna go read to the halfway point of Ship of Destiny, although if this keeps ramping up the way Madship did, I might just blast all the way through to the end. So if I come back and I finish the whole thing, I'm sorry, but also I warned you. I'll try to come back at the halfway point. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. And once I get to the end, I'll be able to kind of reflect on the whole thing a little bit better. Because like I said, I'm really starting to feel like this is just one gigantic 3,000 page book that was chopped into 3. And it is feeling harder and harder to talk about them as individual installments because that's really not what it feels like. So, Ship of Destiny, here we come. Okay, well, I warned you, and I did in fact just read all of Ship of Destiny. So there's no mid-book update. This is just me talking about the entire book, and then by extension, the entire trilogy. Where do I start? Okay, first of all, I read this very quickly. I mean, it took time because it's, once again, a beast of a book, but I basically did nothing but read this since I started it. I felt very driven to finish it, to figure out where everything would end up. I was very invested. I cared a lot about the characters. I wanted to know where everything was going to go. I wanted there to be reunions and characters getting their just desserts and people getting rescued and people getting murdered and all of that. And while a lot of what I wanted came to pass, at least maybe not exactly how I would have wanted it, but, in some way, shape, or form. I would also say that in some ways I found the way that this book wrapped up to be somewhat unsatisfying for me, at least for certain characters and certain storylines. And I'm really sad about it because as much as I still had some critiques and qualms about the final book in the first trilogy, which is what? Assassins, it's right on my shelf right there, Assassin's Quest. It wasn't a perfect book either, but it did so many things so well that I loved so much, and I ended up giving it 5 stars anyway, because I just felt like it wrapped the trilogy up so well for me, and I was so emotionally invested, and it made me cry multiple times, and I just felt all the feelings. In this book, while I did tear up a couple times, and I was quite invested in some of their stories, some of those final scenes really pulled on my heartstrings. It just didn't quite land for me as well. And there were just so many characters whose endings felt unfinished, unsatisfying, lacking in some way. And on the one hand, it's perhaps more realistic, and we'll go through it. I'll go through the characters and their stories and their arcs and everything. And I definitely didn't expect this to wrap everything up with a perfect bow for every single character and for everyone to have a happy ending as they rode off into the sunset. But I did feel like some of the endings just didn't quite work for me. And that is too bad. While I do think that the characters in this trilogy are fascinating and complicated and messy, and some of them have incredible growth and really great character arcs throughout the trilogy, there are other characters that I found shockingly stagnant and simplistic in a way that kind of surprised me, to be honest. I expected more from some of the characters, and I struggled with some of them because it felt like not only did they never have any agency, which perhaps is meant to be intentional, but I just felt like nothing was really done with it. It was just frustrating as a reader, but also that they just didn't really grow or change that much. Or for some of the characters, there was a change, but it was quite abrupt and didn't feel properly developed for me personally. And that's frustrating for me. And I really felt in the first trilogy that Robin Hobb's character work was intense and amazing and incredible. And I was really expecting the same here. And it, in some places, yes, but in many places, no for me this time. And that was too bad. I am such a character-driven reader. I really expected to fall in love with all the characters. And while I did end up loving several of them who I wouldn't have imagined loving from the first book, there were other characters that I felt I just never was able to connect to. And that was too bad. And that definitely kept me more at a distance from certain storylines as the trilogy progressed. But I'm going to start with spoilers so I can just talk at you for a while. I wish I could talk with you. However, you are in the future. So leave your comments down below so that we can actually talk to each other. But anyways, spoilers starting now. Of course, I've already touched on the world building, the writing style, the descriptions of various places, the way the magic is working, the lore, and the development of that continued to be amazing. I loved the final reveals that we got in this book about how the serpent to dragon pipeline works, and how the memories work, and how the live ships are made, and the connection that they have to dragons. All of that stuff was fascinating, and I loved it. It was so interesting. I loved the idea that the ships are, especially for someone like Paragon, part of the way he comes across is because of the fact that he is more than one consciousness held in the same body. And, it was never intended to be that way. And he doesn't really have the tools to process that and to organize that. And Paragon was really such an interesting character to me. And I really loved how he developed over the course of the novel. Even if I have a couple, I don't know if I'd say issues, but a couple sticking points about how his plotline ended and how it dovetails with other characters' endings. I think those were the best parts of this trilogy for me, and make me excited to continue in this series, because I imagine we'll just keep building on this amazing world, and we'll keep learning more about the Elderlings and dragons and, past civilizations and how this magic works, and it will keep expanding as we continue, and I'm excited about that. But I really want to focus on the characters and on some of the major, plot points, major events of this book, because it's a long one and this whole trilogy is long, and I kind of feel like no matter how long I talk for and how long this video ends up being. There are things that I just won't end up being able to talk about. So again, feel free to leave comments down below. If there are things that I don't bring up that you want to talk about more, just indicate that your comment has spoilers. So write spoilers and then hit enter a couple times so that your comment is below the read more. But I'm going to try to go through my list so that I don't miss anything too important. So I think I'm going to start with more minor characters and work my way up. Starting with Kyle. I don't know why Kyle needed to be alive until the point that he was. The fact that Kyle was kept alive for so long just to die so suddenly and unsatisfactorily, why? What was the point? I wish he'd just been killed because there was no point. He didn't see Wintro again. He didn't see Malta again. He didn't see Kefria again. The only person that he had a reckoning with is Althea. And it wasn't even a reckoning. At that point, she was like, I have bigger fish to fry. I don't even care anymore. And all it did was let us see him incredibly diminished after presumably being tortured over a long period of time, which, as crappy as he was as a person, and he was terrible, did he deserve to be tortured for a long period of time? No. I don't think anyone does, to be totally honest. I just think he could have died way earlier than this. There was no reason for him to come back. And if he was kept alive, why could we not have some moments of reckoning? Bring him back, have him and Kefria sit down and her ask for a divorce, if that exists in this world, and say, yeah, I'm good without you, actually. Have Malta see her father for who he really is and fully let go of her idolizing of him and realize that so much of what she has learned and what has allowed her to be strong and to grow into an adult and to take her destiny into her own hands and all the agency that she built up was due to her mother and her grandmother's influence and what they taught her and them intentionally trying to teach her how to exist in the world and how to protect herself, and that she learned from them, and also that so much of it came from within and was her own doing. On the other hand, I get it. Maybe it's fine for her to hold on to those positive memories of her dad. Maybe it's not the end of the world. But I do think for her arc, the realization that she did it herself and that comes from a line of very strong, powerful, independent women who are smart and capable and savvy, and that is who she takes after instead of crappy father would have been great. So Kyle, the way his story ended up, why? Just kill him if you're going to do that. If that's how it was going to end, just kill him then. Personally, that's what I think. Costco, the satrap. He is also a horrific person. He is a terrible, terrible person. What he did to Cirilla is beyond imagining. He's a horrific human being. Deserves the worst things in life. Didn't get any of the worst things in life. How is that fair? Life isn't fair. It's fine. I really don't have... I think his ending is probably somewhat realistic. I'm not necessarily angry at the way his story ended. I mean, he's a crappy leader and also a crappy person, and maybe someone else should be in charge, but fine. It's fine. It's fine. Maybe the fact that he has all these advisors and these connections, maybe he will be a little bit better moving forward. Or maybe not. Maybe someone will overthrow him next week, and maybe that would be better for everyone. Still, I did find him, when he wasn't being the scum of the earth, very entertaining. I could imagine a lot of people finding him incredibly annoying, and he is annoying, but he was annoying in a way that made me laugh. Like, he's just so ridiculous all the time. There were so many moments where they would be in the worst possible situation, and he would just say something so out of touch that I couldn't help but laugh because it's just stupid. It's just silly. And that doesn't make him less of a terrible person, but I kind of needed the levity, some of the breaks in tension that he delivered, and I honestly really loved how dealing with him was kind of that final straw for Malta to grow up, because she kind of had to parent him because he's such a child. And that reversal was really the final push for her to come into her own and to become incredibly independent and savvy and, a little manipulative, but in a way that she needed to be to survive in that situation. And I loved that for her. I loved that he was able to be that catalyst for her. And I loved that he ended up begrudgingly respecting her and seemingly wanting to have a continued working relationship with her and feeling that she had something to contribute in terms of politics and, trade and understanding the world and considering how things started between them. I thought that development was really satisfying. Again, he's the worst. If he had died, that would have been fine too. But I did appreciate the part that he played in Malta's development. Who is the next most minor character? I guess Selden, the littlest brother. I liked him. He's a very minor character for the first 2 books, and then even in this book, he's pretty minor. I did really enjoy the few moments we got between him and Malta, their sibling relationship. I thought they had some really tender, sweet moments, and funny moments too. And he had some great moments with Rain as well. And I also loved his development into this incredibly precocious, older than his years child because of the influence of the dragon, and him starting to go on these long, flattering monologues about how beautiful and enchanting and majestic and, worship worthy the dragon is, and just making up songs about her and stuff. It was quite entertaining. He also was a bit of comic relief for me. I did feel like it was a bit sudden, and I understand that it was the dragon's influence was part of why he the whole reason why he shifted like that. I did feel that the way he was written was a little bit unrealistic. Even with that influence, it did feel like he was written to be at least an 18-year-old instead of 10 or whatever he is at some points. Some of the things he said, I just thought, no child would say that ever, literally ever, even in a fantasy world with dragons, no child would say that. And again, it's the dragon. We don't really know to what extent the dragon is impacting his personality and what he's saying, and maybe that comes up in a later series. But I still liked him. He was cute. He had some cute moments. He was kind of funny. I did feel like Kefria's reaction to him starting to change was a little disappointing for her. And I don't know how to feel about her seemingly being pretty nonplussed about him being taken away to Treehouse Land. I cannot remember the name of their treehouse city for the life of me. I keep putting it in my notes as Treehouse Land, and that's what it has stuck as in my brain. But you know what I'm talking about. Him getting taken away, and Kefria's kind of like, I lost all my other kids and my husband. Who cares at this point? And I just think, like, you're not even going to fight for your last kid? Really? I feel like that would have been a more satisfying moment if she had been very reluctant to let go of her last child and then realized maybe it was best for him and that was difficult for her. I think Hobb tried to deliver that, but because up to that point we'd seen so little interaction between them, she seemed pretty unconcerned about him for the most part. And then she was so visibly disgusted, terrified of the changes that he was going through. It just didn't quite land as well for me. Poor Selden. At least he's going to have a great fun time in the treehouse, in Treehouse Land with all of his new friends. Then we have Cirilla, I guess, is the next one I would bring up. Cirilla kind of is one of those characters where I found their arc a little unsatisfying. I saw so much potential in her from the start, despite kind of disliking how her dynamic was set up and how it was framed in this very not like other girls way of she is the only one of the Satrap's companions who is uninterested in sleeping with him and who remembers what the job is supposed to be, and that she is advising him politically and that is it. And, she is above all of that. And I understand that that was set up that way because of the way her arc goes and the fact that she is assaulted, that the Satrap gives her to the captain of the ship they're on to use for a long period of time. However, even though that happens off page, which I appreciate, and it wasn't sort of lingered on or made into this spectacle or something objectifying, I do feel like it was underdeveloped. She as a character wasn't on the page that much. Her healing from that, her reckoning with the trauma of that was kind of dropped after a little while. And on the one hand, we didn't get that much with her in terms of intimate relationships. We didn't get that much time with her outside of specific political discussions with the traders. So there wasn't maybe as much time for that to happen. But if that's the case, why did it need to happen in the first place, right? Like, if we're going to establish that this new character that comes in the second book is going to be assaulted many times and that that's going to be a very traumatic experience for her, I would expect that to be a much deeper part of her character and for the character to get enough time on the page that it can be fully worked through and reckoned with. And I do think that it came back a couple times. I do think we saw that trauma, especially, in the more direct aftermath. But I feel like as the series went on, it was referenced less and less. And the ways that it came up felt sort of, too vague, too quickly brushed under the rug. I feel like it comes up later that she struggles a bit to resist or to stand up to speak back, talk back to this man because she has a bit of a fight or flight response or a freeze response. And one could infer that part of that, especially because we saw her earlier on and how easily she talked back to the satrap before everything happened to her. I could see that that is a reaction to her trauma, but I just felt like it wasn't connected enough for me, and we didn't spend enough time on it. For me personally, I think her arc in general was a little lackluster, in my opinion. I think she's meant to have this huge shift from trying to grasp power for herself to realizing that she actually wants to work with people to make the world a better place for everyone and coming into community. Like, that transition wasn't established well enough for me on page. We didn't get to see enough facets of her as a person. I honestly don't know that much about her or her interests other than being interested in this particular town and always wanting to visit and studying it for a long time. I don't understand Ronica and Kefria offering to have her literally move in with them at the end. Even if they decided, yes, they would hire her for this position to be essentially an ambassador or a liaison, that would make sense to them to do, and that they felt like her expertise was worth it, which is fair and fine. I mean, if they can trust her and they think they can, so fine. But literally letting her move in with you, like, I don't know, if you're going to pay her a wage, maybe she can get an apartment. Like, can she rent a room somewhere? You want her to move in with you? I missed the part where that relationship was developed. I thought it was weird. I just thought it was weird. I think she could have been an amazing character, and I felt like she was really underutilized. So that was kind of a disappointment for me. Ronica continued to be great. She was, I feel like as we got towards the end of the book, she was less involved in everything. And especially as Kefria started to come into her own, Ronica kind of took a step back. But I did like Ronica a lot. I'm still annoyed at her for her initial decisions with, messing with her husband's will and setting all this in motion because it felt very short-sighted. However, I do like Ronica. She's a badass. She's interesting. She's smart. I like her. I don't have much else to say about her, but I do like her. Kefria had great development for me. Again, outside of things with her kids, where she kind of forgets to care about her kids, it seems, at one point. I do like that she comes into her own as a person. And I do like that she realizes that Kyle wasn't all that. I do wish that she had a confrontation with Kyle, had a moment to tell him that she came to that conclusion. That would have been very satisfying for me. But I loved seeing her come into her own, being the head of her family, getting involved in politics, being able to share her ideas and to be valued as a person outside of her role as a wife and mother. I thought that was really well done. And I found her to be a very interesting and likable character by the end, which is shocking to me based on how she started. I think her arc was really well done. But again, I think she needed closure with Kyle. I needed to see her slap him at least once. I don't know if other people would put Brashen next in terms of importance, but Brashen never did anything for me. That man is as bland as an untoasted piece of Wonder Bread. What is the appeal of this man? I guess he's good at his job to some extent. He seems like an okay captain. He seems like a nice enough dude. He's generally pretty good to Althea, although I do have a point of contention that I will bring up once we get into Althea and what happened to her near the end of the book and how that wraps up, because there was, a portion of how he was written near the end there that was really pissing me off. But he's so bland. He's not an interesting character. I'm sorry. He's just not. There's nothing there for me. And the one thing that I think made him interesting was the fact that he was estranged from his family, and that doesn't go anywhere. His family is still like, yeah, no, you're not part of the family. You don't get to get married here. Go away. So, okay, nothing ever changes for him. Nothing ever progresses. I mean, he gets to be the captain of Paragon. Good for him, I guess. I found him very uninteresting, I must admit. Amber up next, not because I would say that she is at this level of minor character in my list, but because I have less to say about her other than literally just the fact that I love Amber. She's the best. She was probably my favorite character in this trilogy even before I realized who she was. And then once I realized she was the fool, I loved her even more. She's amazing. She's the best. Why is she so great? Because she is. I love her so much. I think in the last update, I talked about all the reasons why I love her. Hopefully I am not just making that up and I actually did that because I don't want to go through everything again, but she's the best. I adore her. The fact that she recarved Paragon's face for him to give him sort of a Nissan life, to allow him to combine everyone together into one and to feel more settled in who he was, to give him his own fresh identity, gave him his eyes back. And the fact that it seemed, to me anyway, that this book was implying that she carved him to look a little bit like Fitz. Are you kidding me? Break my fucking heart, why don't you? I'm so excited for Amber / the Fool to go on and do more things and to follow her and love her forever. She's the best. I adore her. I just don't have that much to say because she's the best, and I have zero complaints whatsoever or anything to really get into other than the fact that she's the best, and I love her so, so, so much. Okay. I'm going to save Paragon to talk about kind of in conjunction with Kennet because their stories are so intertwined. And I'm going to save Vivacia. I don't know how to say Vivacia. I feel like every time I say it differently. You know who I'm talking about. I don't know why no one pronunciation is sticking in my head, but Vivacia I'm going to hold on to because I want to talk about her a little bit in conjunction with Wintro and Althea's storylines. So is there anyone else I want to talk about? I'll talk about Malta and by extension, Rain. Rain, I like Rain. He is a little bit bland as well, but I do like him. I like him and Malta together as well, but I still continue to think their age gap is weird and just didn't need to be there. I don't think we really dove into his depths, but I do think he's an interesting partner for Malta. I appreciate that he thinks that she's the smartest, coolest, prettiest person on the planet. Good for her. She deserves that. Again, why isn't he closer to her age? Because there was literally no reason for him not to be. Couldn't tell you, but he's fine. Good for them getting back together, you know? Happy for them. And that brings me to Malta, who I love. Malta is probably my next favorite character after Amber, I would say. She has the best arc ever. Her transformation from the first book to the third is ridiculous. And there was one point where I was worried that her transformation was mostly going to be caused by drowning in the memories of the dragon. And it was going to be kind of similar to her younger brother Selden, where the change felt externally imposed upon her and that it was less her own personality, but more so the dragon's personality being expressed. And there were a couple moments like that early on where it felt a little bit forced, but so much of her transition just felt like natural, going from being a child to an adult, grasping her own destiny, grabbing life by the horns, finding her agency, finding her strength, finding where she is able to come to, interactions from a place of power, what she has to bring to the table and what her strengths are, how she can use them to keep herself safe and to get what she needs and to help other people, the ways that she was able to interact with difficult personalities around her and make the best of it. And I was so impressed by her growth. I was so impressed by where she ended up. I found her so excruciatingly irritating and frustrating at the beginning, and her transformation was just amazing. So round of applause to Robin Hobb for writing that because it was amazing. And I did appreciate that by the end, she still feels like a girly girl, She still wants people to think she's pretty. She's excited that what she thought was a scar, that something other people were going to judge her for, is actually this gorgeous dragon scale crown that now is becoming a fashion trend that people are trying to imitate, that people think she's beautiful, that she can wear pretty dresses and dance with her intended and sparkle in the light because of her scales. And she's allowed to care about those things, and by the end it doesn't feel like it's frivolous. And it's not treated like it's a sign of her being less intelligent or less interesting or less of a strong female character or silly in any way or frivolous. And I loved that because I was very worried that as she had her eventual growth that I could see on the horizon, that she was going to become less and less feminine, traditionally feminine. And I'm glad that she was allowed to hold on to that because I was starting to worry, like I said earlier on in this video, about the ways that female characters were being handled and the interaction between the types of strong female characters we were getting and the way the narrative was framing womanhood and femininity and tying that to the patriarchy and misogyny. And I still have thoughts on that. I will talk about that once I get through the characters, but Malta was amazing. I love her so much. She's the best. If I didn't love the Fool with my entire heart, she would be my absolute favorite character in this book. And she's fighting for the title. I mean, the Fool is by far my favorite character in the first trilogy. And through this entire series so far, the Fool is my favorite, but Malta's amazing. And the growth is incredible. It's ridiculous. Okay, so now we've kind of made it to who I would consider to really be the main characters of the story. I mean, Malta also I would say is a main character, but I would say Wintro, Kennet, Althea, and Paragon are really the central characters of this story and the heart of the story in many ways, which is part of what I struggled with because I never warmed up to Wintro. Kennit is a horrible human being, an interesting character, but a terrible human being. Althea's character kind of never went anywhere, which was really sad for me. And Paragon, while I loved him so much, he probably would be my third favorite character after Amber and Malta. I'm not sure how I feel about the way his backstory was revealed and his connection to Kennit. So I feel like I have to talk about them all at once because their stories are so intertwined. I will start with the fact that Althea, like I already mentioned, the fact that this is set up so much to be her story, where it feels like it is a book about existing as a woman in a patriarchal society where she should inherit the ship, she should be the captain, and she doesn't get to be because she's a woman and because of the expectations that society has, but also the expectations her family has, including her female family members, her mother and her sister, that destiny is taken away from her, that her birthright has been taken away from her. And it felt like the book was setting it up to be her journey to take back her birthright, to prove that she can in fact be a captain despite being a woman, and that she can be an amazing captain, and that she deserves to be the captain of Vivasha, of her family's ship. And instead what we get is 3 books of her working towards that goal, and then as soon as she is able to take that goal at the very end of the last book, she just doesn't even work through this decision on page. It's sort of in retrospect. She just kind of mentions it to Brashen offhand because he thinks she's gonna leave to captain her ship. And she's like, oh, you thought I was going to leave? Yeah, no. No, I decided that it's actually not my ship anymore. So I'm going to stay with you. What? After all that? Really? And I think maybe it's meant to be a theme of, her realizing that what she thought she always wanted isn't actually what she wanted, which would be fine, I guess. We just spent so much time, so much effort. People died trying to get your ship back for you, Althea. And then you finally get the chance and you just say, thanks, but no thanks. That pissed me off. I'm not going to lie. And even if she doesn't take her ship back because she feels like her ship isn't the same anymore, they actually don't have the connection she thought they would have. Maybe she decides she feels she has more of a connection with Paragon and wants to stay with him, although there's complications to that we will get to. She doesn't get to be captain because Brashen is captain of Paragon. So after all that, when she has clearly proven again and again that she has what it takes to be captain, she still doesn't get to be captain. She's still going to be first mate under her boyfriend on his ship, having to call him sir. What? I didn't need happy endings for everyone where they skip off into the sunset and have the best possible conclusion, but I'm sorry, I needed Althea to be the a captain of a ship somewhere by the end of this. The fact that she doesn't get to be a captain feels wrong on every level to me. And by extension, the fact that Wintro is the captain, are you kidding me? First of all, there was an age gap there. I actually don't remember exactly how old Althea is. I think she might be around maybe early 20s at the start. She is a fully grown adult. She's been working on ships for a very, very, very long time. She knows what she's doing. Why would she not take over for at least a while? And then when she decides that she's had enough, she had some good years as captain, she's ready to move on and do other things with her life, maybe hang out with Brashen, maybe then she could give the ship to Wintro if he wanted to take over. And in the meantime, he could continue to work on the ship. He could be a mate maybe, and, continue to work on his skills. Wintro's like 16 by the end of the series. There is no way that a 16-year-old Wintro should be the captain of this ship. What? First of all, he had 0 experience at the start of this. He went through most of the series not gaining any experience because he refused to actually engage with being on the ship because he wanted to be anywhere else. And then when Kennit takes over, he starts getting more involved. He's learning how to fight. He's learning more about the ship, getting a little bit more invested, but he's still, I'm sorry, I refuse to accept that Wintro actually knows what he's doing. There is no way. The transformation at the end when he's sort of stepping into Kennit's role, it literally just felt like it was writing him sort of as Kennit, like a milder Kennit. And that was so unrealistic to me, especially because he continues to have this back and forth where all of his development as a character is 1 step forward, 2 steps back. And every time it's the same thing. He starts to doubt himself. He starts to not know what his path is. He starts to question his faith or question his belief in Kennit or question what he should do with his life. And then he can't figure it out. He just wallows in not knowing, which makes sense because he's a teenager. He has no agency. He doesn't make very many decisions. Things just happen to him. I understand that why he develops an attachment to Kennit and why Kennit becomes a bit of a father figure for him and why he struggles so much to see Kennit in a negative light after the way that he basically imprinted on him. But I don't have to like it. And I also don't have to think that he's mature enough to be the captain of a ship by the end of this, because I really don't think that he is. I think it's ridiculous, to be totally frank. And I don't understand why Althea couldn't take over while he continues to train and learn. And maybe eventually, once he's actually an adult, he could maybe take over if that's what they all want. No, I don't buy his transformation. I don't like Wintrow's character development. No, I did not appreciate it. So I think it's weird that he has given up everything that he ever wanted for his life to basically live according to his live ship's expectations of him, and also not doing it entirely the way that Kennit would have, but essentially doing what Kennit would have wanted to do, but in his own way, where he is fulfilling Kennit's plans and carrying forward his legacy for him. It just feels like Wintrow has been totally erased into Kennit's successor in a way that I found quite off-putting. And I just feel like he never came into his own. He never developed his own sense of self and his own strength of will and his own agency in his story. It was always other people manipulating him, influencing him, telling him what to do, and him capitulating over and over again. And Etta as well. Etta is another character who, I mean, I liked Etta more than Wintrow. I think Etta had more development than Wintrow, but I do think that Etta was growing into her own, becoming so much more of a powerful character, developing more of her own agency, more of her own point on life, starting to see through Kennit, I thought, for a while. Turns out, no, she's still going to mourn him forever and, like, again, live her life to kind of fulfill his wants and needs for her, despite accepting and knowing, for both of them, accepting and knowing that he sexually assaulted Althea. They are going to continue to keep his memory alive and talk about him like a great hero and try to fulfill his dreams, even if they do it in their own way. And them sort of the implication that they're going to raise Kennit and Etta's child together and potentially end up in a romantic relationship. I hate that. I'm sorry. I hate that. I do not like that at all. I want Etta to have her own life. I wish she could be free of Kennit. The fact that she seems to be trapped in his memory for the rest of her life, don't love that. And for Wintrow too, when does he get his own life? He never wanted to be here in the first place. And it's fine if he changed his mind. I just feel like we didn't really see that. He grasped onto Kennit with all he could because he finally felt like he had a father figure, but I still never really saw the connection between him deciding he actually loves being at sea and he wants to be a pirate or a trader. Where is that coming from internally? Because I never saw that for him. And then Kennit. Kennit is an interesting character for sure. He's a very complicated character. We learned so much about his backstory in this book, and I do think that it seems like one of the primary themes being explored and something that Robin Hobb was really trying to work through in this book is how trauma shapes a person and whether we can have compassion for a child who was abused and who come out of that with trauma while still condemning the adult that they became, leaning into a generational trauma storyline and theme, and also connecting that to Paragon. Paragon not only brought him back to life twice, using his own life force. So Kennit is getting this, dragon personality injected into twice as a child. He experiences severe trauma, physical abuse, sexual abuse, but also Paragon tries to take his pain away. And on the one hand, it feels like a compassionate act. It feels like Paragon is desperate to do anything he can to help this child that he has a deep connection with, who is being so horribly treated. He's being abused, and no child should go through what child Kennit went through. And Paragon is trying to take away his pain. But inadvertently, through doing that, he doesn't remove the memory. Kennit still lives with the memory of what happened. He doesn't feel the emotional attachment to it in the same way. So much of the pain has been removed from his memories that it feels like it removed, on some level, his capacity for understanding suffering, his own and others. I feel like inadvertently, Paragon stunted Kennit's ability to feel empathy, and that leads to so many of the things that he does later on, and the ways that he manipulates people, the ways that he's incapable of genuinely connecting to people and loving people, the ways that he abuses people. He seems incapable of understanding what that kind of suffering feels like. I don't know if it's meant to be an argument for the fact that the pain is actually part of being a human being, and that without the pain, we can't understand our own experiences or other people's experiences. But if that is the message, the fact that Paragon does it again with Althea makes no sense to me. Of course, she's an adult, she's not a child, and so she's had more time to develop empathy before this point, so maybe it wouldn't have the same effect. Maybe Paragon has learned and did it to a much smaller degree. But I do think it's odd to not really reflect on the ways that it contributed to him turning into the monster that he'd been running from his entire life, and then to turn around and say, hey, Althea, I know that the monster that I, in some ways, contributed to creating traumatized you. Should I do the same thing I did to him to you in case that helps you? I don't necessarily think that the book is trying to get us to feel more empathy for Kenneth than other characters. I think the book is pointing out how complicated it is, and that you can simultaneously hold two truths. You can feel more than one thing at once. You can feel empathy for what Kenneth went through as a child and know that no child deserves that, and he didn't deserve that, while also hating the man he became. You can understand why his childhood experiences led to that without feeling that his choices are justified, and without necessarily liking him or thinking that he deserves a happy ending because of what he did to other people. And I think you can hold all those things at once, and I think the book is trying to do that. I don't know if the book perfectly finds that balance or threads that needle, and I imagine different readers are going to react differently and have it walk away with a different impression of how the book is framing Kenneth and his story, and what the book wants us to feel about him. And I'd be very curious to know, if you've read the book, what you felt about how the book was framing Kenneth and his story. I think what I struggle with a little bit is him being reincorporated into Paragon. I understand the logic that Paragon gave up quite a bit of himself to bring Kenneth back twice, and so he kind of needs that life force back to tie himself back together. But the fact that he's now incorporating everything that Kenneth was into himself and has all his memories, and his eyes become Kenneth's eyes, there is something about that I don't love. Something that feels like Kenneth gets to live on forever in a way in the ship, in a way that, does he deserve that? And then that extends to the fact that Althea, as far as we know, for the foreseeable future, is going to be working on Paragon, working on the ship. And she knows that Paragon has Kenneth's memories, remembers her trauma vividly, and also has his eyes. Every time she looks at Paragon and sees his eyes, she sees the man who assaults her's eyes. I don't love that for her either. Not that I think that Paragon is responsible for what Kenneth did, because he's not at all. But I do think the fact that he has reabsorbed Kenneth's essence and experiences and has his eyes now should be a bigger deal than it is, and should be a bigger deal for Althea than it is. Obviously, it's acknowledged that it's weird for her and hard for her, but it doesn't seem to play a part in her decision to stay, and I think that's odd, personally. I have not shared a similar experience to Althea, and so I can't speak to what that trauma is like and what the process of healing from that is like from firsthand experience, and so I'm not telling anyone else how to feel about it, and I do think that it's a very individual thing, and healing is going to look incredibly different for every person who goes through this kind of trauma. From my perspective, reading it, I did feel like the book spent a lot more time on Althea's reckoning with it after the fact than the actual moment itself. The assault is on the page, but I didn't feel like it was lingering on it. I didn't feel like it was an objectifying moment. It didn't feel like it was there for shock value. It was shocking and hard to read, but it felt like it was done respectfully, in my personal opinion. And then I felt like it spent so much time after that dealing with the aftermath. Her being in shock, her being angry, her telling people and no one believing her, which was absolutely devastating. But I loved that she could advocate for herself and push back and say again and again, no, you're wrong. He did me. Listen to me, believe me, I am not crazy. I wasn't just having a nightmare. This happened and you will believe me. And she continues to advocate for herself until almost everyone comes around to believing her, including Etta, which I was pleasantly surprised by. The one person that doesn't believe her is Vivacia. The fact that it's her own family ship who is incapable and unwilling to accept that Kenneth could do something like that, because then it would mean that everything that she ever shared with Kenneth was a lie and she couldn't process that, That pissed me off. And part of why it pissed me off is because it's realistic, because people do that all the freaking time. People cannot deal with accepting that someone could be a bad person in their life. They do not want to cut that person out. They don't want to think about that person in a different way. In this case, Kenneth's not even alive anymore. You know, they don't want to change their view of him, and they also don't want to have to change their view of themselves. If they thought he was charming, if they liked him, if they thought that they had a connection with him, if they thought that he was a good person, and they realized that he was capable of something like this, what does it mean about them and their judgment and who they are as a person? And it's easier for people to go down that route and continue to be in denial than to believe and support someone who was victimized. And that happens all the time. So I'm not saying that it's unrealistic, but I did hate it. I did hate reading it. I did hate that it was her ship that wouldn't believe her, and that is really the final breaking point for them in their relationship. How do you come back from that? Hated that so much. But I did love that Althea continued to fight for herself and continue to reiterate what happened to her and didn't let people push her aside and ignore her and tell her she was wrong and gaslight her out of it. I thought that the book spent a lot of time with her suffering after that point. And I do think, it's near enough to the end where I could understand some people feeling that her healing journey was a bit truncated, that it should have lasted longer. But I will say that I didn't feel like the book ended in such a way that it was implying that she's now just better. Again, like it seems very clear that she is still struggling pretty intensely, that she wants to try to start taking steps forward with Brashen to find a way to be intimate with him and not feel, not be triggered and not have a trauma response. And that's going to be a very slow, difficult journey over time where they trust each other and where she needs to feel safe. I don't feel like the book was implying that everything's good now. Paragon took away her pain and Brashen's going to, show her what a real man's love is like and that she's going to be fine. I don't think that the book was doing that at all. But I could see some people feeling like it happened a little too fast. And I think that some of that is by necessity because of where it happened in the story. I mean, it could have happened earlier, but I do think once that happens, rails Althea's entire story, understandably. And I think that's also realistic. But I could understand maybe Hobb wanting that to happen later because it was going to kind of eclipse everything else for her. I do think that it was, I personally think that it was pretty well done. But what I don't think was well done, for me personally, like I said, was Althea's ending. I don't like that she doesn't get her ship back, that she doesn't get to be a captain, that she is now sacrificing everything she wanted for her life to work on a ship with Brashen, under Brashen as his mate, and that's her ending. That to me is very unsatisfying based on how this was set up. I'm not saying that Brashen has to give up being the captain of Paragon for her, but I'm kind of saying that. First of all, Wintrow should have given up the ship to her until he's at least an adult. But if not, bearing that, he could have given her one of the 5 million ships that Kenneth accumulated over the course of the trilogy. I also, I think it makes sense for Kenneth to die. I think I predicted pretty early on that Kenneth was going to die. I'm glad that he died, to be honest. I think he was as much as he was sort of doing good in the world in some ways, he was doing it for the worst reasons, selfish reasons, and I don't think he was ultimately going to be a force for good in the world. I don't know how I feel about him sort of getting to live on in perpetuity with Paragon. On the one hand, I think if I think about it as healing for the child he was, being brought back together with Paragon and them getting together after everything that they went through, after everything Paragon gave up and sacrificed for him, for Kenneth to return to him and return what he took from him, at least in some way, in some form. I could see that feeling like it's full circle, but it also feels in some ways like Kenneth is getting the best possible ending that he doesn't deserve, at least adult Kenneth doesn't deserve. And again, it's meant to be messy, it's meant to be complicated. I don't think you're meant to feel super happy or settled about how that ends. It might take me a while to decide how I feel about it. Maybe I'll never know how I feel about it. I don't know. Leave your feelings down below because I would love to hear your thoughts. I'm still processing and I don't know how to feel. I do think Kenneth was a very interesting character. I hated him by the end, but I did feel compassion for what he went through as a child because no child deserves that. I think the book was effective in telling that kind of story, as hard as it was to read. I do struggle with the ways that Etta and Wintrow especially continue to hold on to the best parts of him. And while they acknowledge on some level the worst parts of him, they sort of brush those under the rug and seem to be moving forward, living their lives for him. I don't love that for them and their arcs. But that's less to do with Kennit and more to do with the influence he has on the people around him. By the end of the book, I felt that some of the things that I was struggling with the framing around female characters and misogyny, got better on some level. And I talked about Malta being sort of the one example of a very feminine woman who was able to stay feminine while also being in her agency and power. I would also say that Ronica and Kefria, to a little bit of a lesser degree, but still are pretty traditionally feminine women, despite the fact that they are the heads of their family and they're sort of taking on some non-traditionally feminine roles in terms of running their estate and speaking up politically. But they are still quite feminine in many ways and described in a more stereotypical feminine way. And they are able to be powerful and have agency and find their way and be individuals in a way that I appreciated. And there were a number of times that characters were expressing internalized misogyny that were pushed back against that I appreciate as well. But I do struggle a bit with how some of the characters' stories end. Althea hanging out with her man as a +1 and not getting her own ending and not getting to take charge after waiting the entire trilogy for that to happen for her. Edda not getting to become the leader of the pirates in her own right, but to be the queen of the pirates because she's carrying Kennit's child. Would they treat her as the queen of the pirates if she wasn't carrying his child? I don't think so. The fact that she carries his heir is the reason why she's the queen of the pirates. If she has a miscarriage, are they going to allow her to continue to be queen of the pirates? I don't know. It also feels like Wintrow is kind of taking over for Kennit, so it's not even really her Tennant's place. What if Edda had become the captain of the ship? Hang on. Imagine Edda taking over. Wintrow can go back to be a monk. Go back to your monastery. Edda taking over, becoming the queen of pirates in the most literal way possible. That would have been badass. See what I'm saying? Cirilla's ending was kind of lackluster to me, considering how big of a theme it was, the way that it was wrapped up, if you can even say that it was wrapped up, the way that those themes were handled by the end of the trilogy, just kind of, it petered out. It fizzled out in a way that I found unsatisfying. I didn't feel that it really interrogated some of the comparisons it set up at the beginning about women who are not like other girls being strong and jealousy between female characters. And obviously there's a lot of misogyny from other characters. There is a lot of patriarchy and misogyny baked into the system. But I also just don't love how female characters continue to deal with internalized misogyny at times in ways that are not addressed, that there are some stereotypical or traditional gender role reinforcing ideas. The young female characters either end up promised to be married or a respectful widow of someone who they're sort of saving themselves for the ghost of the man that they were with. I just feel like it didn't go as far as I wanted based on how it was set up and also based on how people talk about the story, about it having so many strong female characters, about how it allows women to have agency and power, about how it examines misogyny and patriarchy. I just felt like it only went halfway. And I personally found that pretty frustrating. The whole reveal about Paragon being Kennit's family's ship and that he had a connection with Paragon, that reveal I did not expect. I didn't see that coming. I do love the development of the sea serpents and the dragons and their memories and the connection to the live ships. I loved many of the serpents not making it because of Cult Journey, but many serpents being able to develop their cocoons and that they're going to be protected so they can become dragons. I'm really excited to see if the next trilogy picks up from there and carries forward with more dragon lore. I would love to follow what's going to happen with Malta and Rain and kind of restarting the race of the Elderlings because they're being changed by their contact with dragons. I would love to see that continue to develop. I just think it's so fascinating in that part of the world, and the magic and the lore is really great. I think that's it for spoilers. Can I now summarize my thoughts in a non-spoilery way? I really liked this overall. I think the world building, the magic, the lore, the politics are all incredible. I think several of the characters are amazing. My favorite characters are probably Malta, Amber, Paragon, and then I also have a soft spot for Selden. I think Althea has her moments, and there are characters who I really, really, really struggled with or even hated, like Kyle, Kennit, Wintrow really, really got to me. I never grew to be a fan of Wintrow. And then characters that were interesting, but maybe a little bit less developed than I wanted them to be, like Edda or Cirilla. Characters that really grew on me by the end. They didn't become one of my favorite characters in the series, but that they grew so much and they had such an interesting development that I really ended up appreciating them, like Ronica and Kefria. I mean, Malta is also one of those characters, but she ended up being favorites of the entire series. I do think there were so many characters here that there were a number of characters who had a lot of potential who were underutilized. For me, Vivacia was one of them. Edda, I think a little bit was that for me, especially at the end. Althea was that a little bit for me at the end. And then several of the male characters who just felt like they were there, like Brashen and Rain. Sorry to that man, but it is what it is. I think as a trilogy, again, the first book, it was so long, with so much setup. I think the first book was a little bit clunky, probably did not need to be nearly so long. I think that starting like that really set me up to expect something epic and masterful and incredible, and for every single character to have this huge journey, because it was just so laborious to set it up like that I thought, okay, this has to pay off in a major way. And it did, but did it pay off enough to make that first book fully worth it to me? Still kind of no. It was still a 3-star read for me. It was good, but it never quite reached the point where I felt like all of that was worth it and necessary. Mad Ship, like I said, I ended up really enjoying. It was much more fast-paced, much more immersive. I was more invested. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. And Ship of Destiny is kind of the same for me. I was invested. I was immersed. I liked it a lot. I ended up really getting attached to a number of the characters. I liked how a lot of the storylines wrapped up. This is a really great book. This is a really great trilogy. There is so much here to love and to appreciate, but it never quite got there for me, especially not in the way that the first trilogy did. And while I did get a little choked up and emotional a few times reading this, I never fully cried, which I don't have to cry to give a book 5 stars, but it helps. I didn't quite get into the same sort of hyper-focused state that I got into with the first trilogy, where I totally forgot the world around me and I was just completely in the world, and I was so immersed and I was so into it. It transported me in a way that books used to when I was a little kid, reading fantasy under my covers at night when I was supposed to be asleep. And I think I also loved it in a way. Not as much as the first trilogy for me personally. That's maybe an experience a lot of people have where they adore the first trilogy and then this one doesn't quite land as well for them, or vice versa. Let me know where you land in the comments down below. I had enough criticisms and qualms of how some of the plot lines were wrapped up and how some of the characters ended up, that for me, this is also going to be a 4-star read, despite having a lot of incredible things about it. So I think that's where I'm ending with this. Again, I finished this today. I read this whole trilogy in about a week. Maybe with time, I will feel differently about it, but that's where I'm sitting right now. I did really enjoy it. I will continue with the series. I talked about this more in depth in the spoiler section, but I will also say that one of the things that didn't quite land for me was, that final wrapping up of this constant through line of the theme of misogyny and living as a woman under patriarchy. It sort of fizzled out, and some characters ended up having kind of a nice through line in that way, but many of the characters I felt didn't really. And there was this constant tension between the message I think the book was trying to express and the ways that the narrative itself felt like it was reinforcing some traditional gender roles. I certainly think this trilogy is worth reading. I'm glad I read it. I enjoyed it, even if it wasn't an absolute perfect read for me. 3 stars, 4 stars, and 4 stars. I actually think my favorite book in the trilogy was the second one, Mad Ship, by just a little bit. I do think that a lot of aspects of Ship of Destiny were fantastic, but I think because some of the characters and some of the plot lines did not get the kind of conclusion I was hoping for, I wasn't quite satisfied by how some of the storylines ended. That made this a tiny bit less enjoyable to me, whereas during Mad Ship, I could still hold out hope for everything to turn out the way I wanted it to. I'm definitely going to continue this series. I'll try not to wait quite so long to read the next trilogy, and I'll try to keep my expectations in check, because I'm starting to feel like maybe every trilogy is very much its own thing, even though it exists in the same world. I haven't really read another series that is formatted in this way, so it's kind of rewiring my brain in a way, but I really appreciate what Robin Hobb is doing with this series. I think she's very much willing to explore some really difficult subject matter. She seems very interested in exploring trauma and grief. And I do think that's incredibly interesting, because so much fantasy deals with a lot of loss and suffering and war, and then doesn't necessarily reckon with the scars that leaves on people. And I feel like Robin Hobb is willing to go there. And this book in some ways did that really well, and in other ways I think maybe didn't quite land as well as I personally would have hoped, but it still was a tour de force in so many ways, and definitely added to the lore, added to the story, and carried us forward in a way that I found very interesting. And I met some new favorite characters, including Malta. Who would have thought? What a badass. I love Malta so much. Thank you again to Suri for partnering with me on this video. Click the link in my description box or scan the QR code on screen and use code PLANT15 for 15% off Suri. I know you'll see why my husband and I love them so much. But that's it from me. This is probably a very long video. It's probably going to take me a long time to edit. I hope you enjoyed it. Like it if you liked it, subscribe if you haven't already, hype this video up if you're on mobile so more people who enjoy the realm of the Elderlings series can read along with us and join in on the conversation. Please share your thoughts down below because there is so much to think and talk about with this series as a whole, but with this trilogy for sure, and especially that ending. And I would really love to talk through it with more of you because I'm still processing. So share your thoughts down below, and I will see you when I read the next trilogy at some point. Be there or be square. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye, friends.